She looked straight at me and said I was just jealous of her real kids. The whole room laughed. But I stayed silent, my hand resting on the cake I had bought. 3 hours later, inside a locked drawer, I found adoption files with her signature. I realized then that not only this house, but even her real children were part of a scheme to deceive me for decades. This time, I am the one turning the tables. My name is Riley Prescott. I am 32 years old today, by day. I am a successful interior designer in the heart of Denver, a woman who knows exactly how to arrange a room to maximize light, comfort, and warmth. I know how to make a house feel like a home for total strangers, how to select the perfect shade of cerulean for a nursery or the right mahogany finish for a study. Yet, as I sat at the dining table in the house I had grown up in, the house I had poured nearly $70,000 of my own money into renovating over the last 5 years, I felt like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. The dining room was suffused with the scent of rosemary and roasted garlic. It was a smell that usually signaled comfort, but tonight it smelled like a transaction. The table was set with the good china, the porcelain plates with the gold rims that used to belong to my mother, though Vanessa, my stepmother, had long ago claimed them as her own discovery. "Happy birthday, Riley," Vanessa said, her voice pitching up into that sugary, performative register she reserved for moments when she felt she was being particularly generous. She placed the cake in the center of the table. It was a red velvet cake, my favorite, though I noticed immediately it was from the grocery store down the street, not the bakery I usually frequented. That was fine. The thought counted, or so I told myself. "Thanks, Vanessa," I said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. My father, Mark, sat at the head of the table. He looked tired. He always looked tired these days, a permanent grayness settling into his skin that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with compliance. He took a sip of the Cabernet Sauvignon I had bought on my way home from work, a bottle that cost me $80, and avoided making eye contact with me. "Make a wish." My half-sister, Haley, chirped. She was 12, sitting beside her 10-year-old brother, Jace. They were good kids. They had Vanessa's sharp nose but my father's soft chin, and they were currently eyeing the cake with the innocent hunger of children who had no idea that the ground beneath their feet was shifting. I looked at the flickering candles. 32 flames. 32 years of trying to be good enough, of trying to fill the void my mother left behind, not just for myself, but for my father. I closed my eyes. My wish wasn't for wealth or love or success. It was pathetic, really. I wished for a single year where I didn't feel like I had to buy my way into this family. I blew out the candles. The smoke curled up, gray and acrid, disappearing into the dining room chandelier I had installed 6 months ago. "Yay!" Jace clapped his hands, the sound startlingly loud in the quiet room. Vanessa began to cut the cake. Her movements were precise, almost surgical. She handed a slice to Mark, then to Jace, then to Haley. Finally, she slid a piece toward me. She licked a smudge of frosting from her thumb and leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. The shift in the atmosphere was instant. It was as if the temperature in the room had dropped 20 degrees the moment the candles went out. "Sss." "Riley," Vanessa began, her tone casual, as if she were discussing the weather or a new recipe. "Your father and I were talking this morning. Now that you are 32, we think it is time for some changes." I paused, my fork hovering over the cake. I looked at my father. He was studying his wine glass with intense fascination, swirling the red liquid around and around. "Changes?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "Yes," Vanessa said. She smiled, but it was a smile that stopped at her mouth. Her eyes were cold, hard flint. "We think it is time you moved out, really moved out. We are going to need the extra room. Haley is getting older. She needs more space. And honestly, having a grown woman living with her father, it is a little pathetic, do you not think? A woman your age should be building her own life, not clinging to her childhood home." I felt the blood drain from my face. The air in my lungs felt heavy, like I was breathing underwater. I pay for the mortgage, Vanessa, I said, my voice trembling slightly despite my best efforts to control it. I paid for the kitchen remodel last year. I paid for the new roof 2 years ago. I cover 80% of the utilities. You pay rent, Vanessa corrected sharply. That is what lodgers do. They pay rent. That does not make it your house. I am not a lodger, I said, looking desperately at my father. Dad, are you listening to this? I am your daughter. Mark finally looked up, but his eyes were glassy, unfocused. He looked like a man who had rehearsed a script he didn't fully understand, but was terrified to deviate from. Riley, honey, he started, his voice weak. Vanessa has a point. You are doing well with your design business. You can afford a nice apartment in the city. This house, well, we are thinking of making some legal changes, putting things in order for the future. Legal changes? I repeated. What does that mean? It means the house is going to be put in a trust for the family, Vanessa interjected, cutting him off before he could say more. For the future of the children, you know, the ones who actually need a future secured. The implication hung in the air, heavy and toxic. I am your child too. Dad, I said, ignoring Vanessa and focusing entirely on him. Mom left this house to us, to both of us. Your mother is dead, Vanessa snapped. The brutality of the sentence made Haley gasp softly. Jace stopped eating his cake, looking back and forth between us with wide, frightened eyes. Vanessa, I warned, my voice dropping an octave. Do not bring my mother into this. I am just stating facts, Vanessa said, shrugging. She took a sip of her wine. My wine. And the fact is, you have been hanging around here like a ghost for too long. We gave you a timeline. 1 month. We want you out by the 1st of next month. That gives you plenty of time to pack your little drafting tables and your color swatches. I looked at Haley and Jace. They were shrinking into their chairs, trying to make themselves invisible. I realized then that they had no idea this was coming. This was not a family decision. This was a Vanessa decision, stamped with my father's cowardly seal of approval. And if I refuse? I asked. My name is on the bills. I have proof of every cent I have put into this property. Vanessa laughed. It was a dry, harsh sound, devoid of any humor. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, invading my personal space. Oh, Riley, she said, shaking her head as if I were a slow child who just couldn't grasp a simple math problem. You really do not get it, do you? You think because you throw money at things, you own them? You think buying a new refrigerator makes you a mother? You think fixing a roof makes you a daughter? She paused for effect, her eyes darting to her 2 children, then back to me. You are just jealous of my real kids, she said. The words landed like a physical blow. The room went silent. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. The refrigerator I had bought $3,000. Real kids? I whispered. Yes, Vanessa said, her voice dripping with venomous satisfaction. Haley and Jace, the ones who actually belong here, the ones who are a real family. You look at them and you hate that you are just the leftover, the spare part from a broken machine. You are jealous because they have a mother who fights for them, and a father who chooses them. You are just jealous of my real kids. I looked at my father, waiting for him to explode, waiting for him to slam his hand on the table and tell her to get out, waiting for him to defend the daughter he had raised, the daughter who had held his hand at my mother's funeral while he wept like a child. But Mark did nothing. He just picked up his fork and pushed a piece of red velvet cake around his plate, decimating the crumb structure, refusing to meet my gaze. Dad, I said. It came out as a plea. It is probably for the best. Riley, he mumbled, his voice so low I could barely hear him. You know, sibling rivalry. It is not healthy for Haley and Jace to have you here if there is this much tension. Maybe you are jealous. Subconsciously, it is time to be independent. He had taken her words. He had actually taken her twisted, hateful logic and adopted it as his own. He was accusing me of being jealous of a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old. The very children I had bought Christmas presents for every single year. The children I had tutored in math. The children I had driven to soccer practice when Vanessa was too busy getting her nails done. I looked at Haley. She looked like she was about to cry. "Riley isn't jealous," she whispered, brave but terrified. "Eat your cake, Haley," Vanessa commanded, not even looking at her. I took a deep breath. My hands were shaking under the table. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table, send the expensive wine and the store-bought cake flying against the sage-green walls. I wanted to grab my father by the shoulders and shake him until the man he used to be fell out. But I didn't. I looked at Jace and Haley. They were terrified. If I screamed now, if I fought back now, tonight would become a trauma they would carry forever. They were innocent in this. They were pawns Vanessa was using to hurt me, and I refused to let her weaponize my reaction against them. I forced the corners of my mouth up. It felt physically painful. "Well," I said, my voice sounding strange and hollow to my own ears. "I guess I better start looking for cardboard boxes then." I stood up. My legs felt numb. "I am going to clear the table." "You do that," Vanessa said, satisfied. She picked up her fork and took a large bite of cake, humming with pleasure. "This cake is delicious. By the way, you should really learn to appreciate the simple things. Riley?" I began to stack the plates. I took my father's plate, which was still full. He didn't stop me. I took Haley's and Jace's, giving each of them a quick, reassuring squeeze on the shoulder. "It's okay," I mouthed to Haley. I carried the stack of dishes into the kitchen I had designed. I had chosen the quartz countertops because they were durable. I had chosen the deep farmhouse sink because it could hold a lot of dishes. I turned on the faucet. The water ran hot, scalding against my skin, but I didn't pull my hands back. I needed to feel something other than the cold, hollow ache in my chest. From the dining room, I heard Vanessa laugh. It was a loud, boisterous sound. Then I heard my father chuckle, a weak, submissive sound that followed hers like a shadow. "She just needs a push." "Mark," I heard Vanessa say, her voice carrying clearly now that she thought I was out of earshot. "She has been leeching off us for too long. Once she is gone, we can finally focus on the real family. And with the house transfer next week, everything will be secure." "I know, Ness," my father replied. "I just hate the conflict." "There is no conflict if one side surrenders," Vanessa said. I stood there, gripping the edge of the sink until my knuckles turned white. The steam rose up, clouding the window that looked out over the backyard, the yard where I had planted hydrangeas 2 summers ago because Mom loved them. "You are just jealous of my real kids." The words echoed in my mind, bouncing off the tile backsplash. Real kids. Leeching off us. House transfer next week. I grabbed the sponge and began to scrub a plate. I scrubbed it harder than necessary, watching the red frosting dissolve into the soapy water. It looked like blood swirling down the drain. For 7 years, I had played the role of the dutiful daughter. I had paid the bills. I had fixed the leaks. I had kept the peace. I had swallowed every insult, every passive-aggressive comment, every exclusion, thinking that if I just loved them enough, if I just supported them enough, I would earn my place. I thought that money and loyalty could buy love, or at least respect. I was wrong. They didn't see me as a daughter or a sister. They saw me as an ATM that had finally dispensed enough cash to be discarded. They saw me as an obstacle to be removed so they could rewrite the history of this family with themselves as the only protagonists. But as I stood there, listening to them toast to their future in the other room, something inside me shifted. It wasn't a break. It was a setting, like concrete hardening. I rinsed the plate and placed it in the drying rack with a deliberate clatter. "Jealous," I whispered to myself, testing the word. No, I wasn't jealous. I was furious. And as I looked at my reflection in the dark window above the sink, I didn't see the sad, pathetic woman Vanessa had described. I saw someone who knew where the bodies were buried. I saw someone who knew exactly how much this house was worth, exactly whose name was on the mortgage statements in the filing cabinet, and exactly how much money I had poured into their comfortable lives. They wanted a stranger? Fine. They were about to find out that the most dangerous person in the world isn't a stranger. It is the person who knows all your secrets and has been holding them for you, waiting for the moment you decide to betray them. I turned off the water. The silence in the kitchen was heavy, charged with potential energy. Tonight, I would play the victim one last time. I would wash their dishes. I would retreat to my room. I would let them think they had won. But tomorrow, the lodger was going to start auditing the landlord. I dried my hands on the towel, took a deep breath, and walked out of the kitchen, leaving the lights off behind me. The darkness felt welcoming. It felt like cover, and for the first time in years, I knew exactly what I had to do. I lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling I had painted myself 3 years ago. It was a shade called dovewing, a soft, warm gray that was supposed to induce tranquility. Tonight, however, it felt like the lid of a coffin. The house was silent, settling into the night with the familiar creaks and groans of timber cooling down after a hot Denver day. Down the hall, behind the closed door of the master bedroom, my father and Vanessa were sleeping, or perhaps they were whispering. Perhaps they were celebrating the successful eviction of the family bank account, which just happened to be named Riley. My clock on the nightstand read 2 a.m. Sleep was a distant country I had been exiled from. Instead of dreams, my mind was a projector, replaying the last 7 years on a loop, searching for the exact moment when I had ceased to be a daughter and had become merely a resource. It started 7 years ago. The grief then had been a physical weight, heavy and suffocating. My mother had passed away from pancreatic cancer, a swift and brutal thief that took her in less than 6 months. I was 25 then, navigating the wreckage of my own life. I was going through a messy divorce from a man who had preferred gambling to fidelity, and I had just been laid off from my junior design firm during a market downturn. I was unmoored. I was vulnerable. And then there was my father, Mark Prescott. He had looked so small at the funeral, a man shrinking inside his own suit. He seemed incapable of boiling water, let alone managing a household. When he met Vanessa at a grief support group 6 months later, I was relieved. I really was. I thought she was a lifeline. She was vibrant, organized, and seemed to dote on him. When they married a mere year after Mom died, I swallowed my discomfort. I told myself that everyone grieves differently. I told myself he deserved to be happy. I moved back in shortly after the wedding. It was supposed to be temporary, just until I got back on my feet, until the design contracts started coming in again. I remember the conversation vividly. We were in the kitchen, the old kitchen, with the peeling laminate countertops and the linoleum floor that trapped dirt. Vanessa was making tea. She had placed a hand on my arm, her touch warm and maternal. "Riley, honey," she had said, "your father and I talked. We do not want you paying rent to some stranger while you are rebuilding your life. Come home. We are family." It sounded so gracious, so benevolent, but then came the addendum, slipped in like a fine print clause. "Of course, things are tight with the wedding costs and the kids," she had added, referring to Haley and Jace, whom she had brought into the marriage as toddlers. "If you could handle the groceries and maybe the utilities, just to help out. I will take care of the cooking and cleaning. I will make this a home again." It seemed like a fair trade, a partnership. I was the daughter returning to the nest, contributing my share. But looking back at that ceiling, I realized that was the moment the contract was signed, a silent, invisible contract that I had adhered to religiously, while they rewrote the terms whenever it suited them. As my career took off, so did their expectations. My interior design business went from a few freelance gigs to a full-fledged firm with high-end clients in Cherry Creek and Lodo. I started making real money, good money, and as my bank account grew, so did the household expenses. I remembered the roof. It was 4 years ago. A spring storm had torn through the suburbs, and water had started dripping into the hallway, ruining the hardwood floors. My father had sat at the kitchen table, head in his hands, staring at a quote from a roofing company for $12,000. I do not know how we are going to do this. Riley, he had said, his voice thick with panic. We barely have any savings left after the medical bills for Jace's asthma. I had stepped up. Of course I had stepped up. I was the capable one. I was the successful one. I will get it. Dad, I had said, consider it an investment. I paid the $12,000. Then I paid another $5,000 to repair the water damage inside. Then came the kitchen. That was Vanessa's project. She had complained for months that the old oven was a safety hazard, that the layout was impossible for cooking family meals. She showed me magazine clippings of open-concept kitchens with quartz islands and custom cabinetry. Imagine how much value this would add to the house. Riley, she had said, eyes shining, it is an investment for all of us. I designed it. I spent nights drawing up the blueprints, sourcing materials at trade discounts, and overseeing the contractors. And I wrote the checks. $45,000. I told myself it was fine because this was my childhood home. This was the legacy my mother had left behind. Improving it felt like honoring her. But tonight, in the cold clarity of betrayal, a terrifying question surfaced. Where was my name? I had paid for the roof. I had paid for the kitchen. I had bought the furniture in the living room. I paid the property taxes last year when Mark claimed cash flow issues. Yet, every time a contractor needed a signature for a permit, Mark signed it. Every time a utility bill arrived, it was in Mark's name. The dynamic had shifted so gradually I hadn't noticed the temperature rising. At first, it was gratitude. Thank you. Riley, we could not do this without you. Then, it became expectation. Riley, the water heater is acting up. Can you call your guy? Finally, it became entitlement. Riley, why have you not transferred the money for the property tax yet? It is due on Tuesday. I had become the wallet. Vanessa was the gatekeeper. And my father? He was the ghost haunting his own life, nodding along to whatever tune Vanessa played. The atmosphere in the house had changed drastically in the last 6 months. It wasn't just the request for money. It was the secrecy. I closed my eyes and pictured the scene from last Tuesday. I had come home early from a site visit, around 2 in the afternoon. Usually, the house was empty. I had walked into the living room and found Vanessa and Mark sitting at the coffee table, surrounded by stacks of paperwork. There were bank brochures, thick legal envelopes, and what looked like blueprints. The moment I stepped through the doorway, Vanessa had practically lunged across the table. She swept the papers into a messy pile, covering them with her arms. "You are home early," she had said, her voice sharp, accusatory. "My client rescheduled," I had replied, setting down my bag. "What are you guys working on?" "Just boring tax stuff," Mark had mumbled, avoiding my eyes. He looked pale, sweating slightly despite the air conditioning. "Financial planning," Vanessa had corrected smoothly, regaining her composure. "For the future, you know, making sure Haley and Jace have a safety net for college. It is complicated." She had stood up then, gathering the papers efficiently and marching them into my father's study, closing the door firmly behind her. I heard the lock click. At the time, I had felt a pang of guilt. I thought I was intruding. I thought, good for them, planning for the kids. But now, the memory replayed with a sinister filter. Why lock the door? Why the panic? If it was just college savings, why act like I had walked in on a murder? And then there was the language Vanessa had started using. It was subtle, insidious marketing. Over dinner, she would say things like, "We need to make sure the house is secure for the children," or "When we transfer the title to a trust, it will be safer." She always said the children. She always said our children. She never said Riley. I sat up in bed, throwing the covers off. The room felt too hot. I had been so stupid. I had been so incredibly, willfully blind. I had let my desire for a family blind me to the reality of the business transaction I was living in. I had assumed that because I was paying for the house, I had a stake in it. But assumption is not a legal strategy. I tried to recall the last time I had seen my mother's will. I was 25, grieving, and drowning in my own divorce papers. Mark had told me, "Do not worry about the legal side. Riley, Mom left everything to me to manage for the family. I will take care of you. I had trusted him. He was my dad. He was the man who taught me how to ride a bike and chased away the monsters under my bed. I never imagined that he would become the monster, or at least the monster's willing accomplice. You are just jealous of my real kids. That sentence floated back to me. Toxic and revealing. That was the tell. That was the slip. Vanessa didn't just hate me. She viewed me as a competitor. But a competitor for what? Affection? No. Vanessa didn't care about affection. She cared about security. She cared about assets. If she truly believed I was just a jealous stepdaughter, she would treat me with pity or annoyance. But she treated me with suspicion. She hid mail. She locked doors. She gaslit me about my own standing in the house. You do not hide bank statements from someone you just dislike. You hide bank statements from someone you are robbing. A cold chill washed over me, starting at the base of my neck and spreading down my spine. It wasn't the air conditioning. It was fear. What if the house wasn't the only thing? What if there was more? My mother had been a prudent woman. She had worked as a pharmacist for 30 years. She saved. She invested. When she died, I knew there was life insurance and retirement accounts. I had never asked for a penny, assuming it was all needed to keep the house running and support Dad. But with Mark's constant complaints about being broke and the need for my financial infusion, where had all that money gone? I got out of bed and paced the small rug in the center of my room. My feet sank into the plush wool, another purchase I had made. If they succeeded in kicking me out next month, what would happen? I would leave. I would rent an apartment, and they would keep the house with the $50,000 kitchen, the house with the $12,000 roof, the house with the equity I had helped build. And if they transferred the title to a trust for the children, I would be legally erased. My contributions would become nothing more than generous gifts from a foolish stepdaughter. I stopped pacing. I looked at my reflection in the full-length mirror on the closet door. I looked tired. My eyes were dark circles, my hair a mess, but the jaw was set. No, I said to the empty room. I wasn't going to walk away. I wasn't going to let them push me out of the home my mother built and I renovated. I needed to know what was in those drawers. I needed to see the deed. I needed to see my mother's will. I needed to see exactly what legal changes they were planning. But I couldn't do it alone. I was a designer, not a detective. I knew building codes, not penal codes. I needed someone who could look at a stack of confusing documents and see the weapon hidden inside. I walked over to my nightstand and picked up my phone. The screen lit up the dark room, harsh and bright. I unlocked it and scrolled through my contacts. I scrolled past clients, past contractors, past old college drinking buddies, until I landed on a name I hadn't called in 6 months. Rowan Ellis. Rowan had been my roommate freshman year. We had bonded over cheap instant noodles and a shared hatred for early morning statistics classes. But while I had drifted into the creative world of color palettes and textures, Rowan had sharpened herself into a weapon. She had gone to law school, graduated top of her class, and was now a partner at a boutique firm in downtown Denver specializing in family law and asset recovery. She was ruthless, she was brilliant, and she was the only person I knew who terrified men like my father. I hesitated for a second. It was 2:15 in the morning, but then I remembered the look on Vanessa's face when she said, "Real kids." I remembered my father looking at his wine glass while his wife evicted me. I opened a new message thread. "Rowan," I typed, "I know it is the middle of the night. I am sorry, but I think my family is trying to steal my inheritance. Actually, I think they might have already stolen it. I need help. I need a shark." I stared at the message. Sending this made it real. It meant admitting that my family was at war with me. It meant admitting that my father was not a victim, but a villain. I pressed send. The little swoosh sound of the message departing felt like the first shot fired in a revolution. I put the phone down. I wouldn't sleep tonight. That was fine. Adrenaline was a better fuel than caffeine anyway. I sat back on the bed, pulling my knees to my chest. The naive daughter who paid for the roof was gone. She had left the building along with the birthday candles. The woman sitting in the dark now was the one who checked the foundation, found the cracks, and knew exactly how to bring the whole structure down if she had to. I waited for the phone to buzz, listening to the silence of the house, realizing for the first time that the silence wasn't peaceful. It was the quiet of a crime scene before the police arrive, and I was the only witness. I sat at a small, wobbly table in the back corner of the Grind, a coffee shop on 16th Street that smelled perpetually of burnt beans and high-stakes anxiety. It was the kind of place where junior associates chugged espresso before court, and freelancers stared dead-eyed into their laptops. It was perfect because it was loud, anonymous, and exactly 20 minutes away from the suffocating atmosphere of my father's house. My hands were shaking as I gripped my cup of black coffee. On the table in front of me sat a thick, navy blue binder. It was not a legal document, not yet. It was my life in receipts. It held the invoice for the roof replacement, the contract for the kitchen remodel, the credit card statements showing payments for the water heater, the landscaping, and even the vintage chandelier hanging in the dining room. It was thousands of dollars of proof that I was not a lodger. The bell above the door chimed, cutting through the noise of the milk steamer. I looked up and saw Rowan Ellis. Rowan had not changed much since college, except her clothes were now tailored to lethal perfection, and her walk was sharper. She wore a charcoal suit that screamed billable hours, and her hair was pulled back in a severe bun that suggested she had no time for nonsense. She scanned the room, spotted me, and marched over, bypassing the line entirely. "Riley," she said, sliding into the chair opposite me without waiting for a greeting, "you look like hell." "I feel like hell," I admitted, my voice cracking. "Thanks for meeting me on such short notice. I know you are busy." Rowan waved a hand dismissively. "For you? I am never too busy. Besides, your text sounded like the opening scene of a Dateline episode. What is going on?" I took a deep breath. I had rehearsed this in the car, but saying it out loud felt like vomiting. I pushed the navy blue binder toward her. "They are kicking me out. Rowan, my dad, and Vanessa. They gave me 30 days. Rowan paused, her hand halfway to picking up the binder. "Kicking you out? As in, evicted?" "As in, get your stuff and leave because you are pathetic." I corrected. I looked her in the eye. Vanessa told me last night, in front of everyone, that I was just jealous of her real kids. Rowan's eyebrows shot up. She actually said that? Real kids? I nodded, feeling the sting of the memory all over again. She said Haley and Jace are the real family, that I'm just clinging to the past. And Dad, he just sat there. He basically agreed with her. He mumbled something about legal changes and securing the future for the children. Rowan didn't offer sympathy. She didn't reach across the table to pat my hand or tell me it would be okay. That was why I loved her. She was a shark, and sharks didn't cuddle. They hunted. She opened the binder. Her eyes scanned the first page, the receipt for the kitchen renovation, totaling $45,000. She flipped the page. The roof invoice, $12,000. She flipped again. Property tax payments, utility bills. "Jesus. Riley," she muttered, doing the mental math. "You have put nearly $70,000 into a house you do not own." "I thought I was investing in my family," I said defensively, though it sounded weak even to me. I do not know. I thought it was my house too. Mom left it to us." Rowan slammed shut the binder. The sound made the guy at the next table jump. "Okay," she said, her voice dropping into a lower, more dangerous register. "Listen to me very carefully. We are done being sad. We are done being the hurt daughter. Right now, I need you to be a client. Can you do that?" I nodded. "Yes." "Good." Rowan leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "First question. Whose name is on the deed? Not who lives there, not who pays the bills. Whose name is legally on the title of the property at the county clerk's office?" I assume it is Dad's." I stammered. "And Mom's. Or maybe just Dad's now. He said he handled the transfer after the funeral." Rowan narrowed her eyes. "You assumed? You never saw the paperwork?" You never saw the new deed? No, I admitted. I was 25. Rowan, I was a mess. I just trusted him. Rule number 1 of asset protection. Riley. Never trust anyone who stands to gain from your ignorance. Rowan recited. If your mother left the house to both of you in her will. Your father could not just take your name off without your signature. Did you sign a quitclaim deed? Did you sign anything waiving your rights to the property? No, I said firmly. I have never signed anything like that. I remember signing some insurance forms and maybe some probate stuff Mark gave me right after she died. But nothing about giving up the house. Rowan tapped her manicured fingernail on the table. Okay, if you are on the deed, they cannot kick you out. They cannot sell it. They cannot mortgage it. They cannot do anything without your consent. But here's the part that worries me. You said Vanessa mentioned legal changes in securing the future? Yes, I said. She said they were transferring the house to a trust for Haley and Jace. Rowan's expression darkened. They cannot put the house in a trust if you own half of it, unless they forged your signature, or unless... Unless what? I asked, my stomach twisting. Unless you do not own half of it, Rowan said bluntly. Unless your mother's will did not say what you think it said. Did you read the original will? The official one? I hesitated. I saw it. Briefly. It was in the safety deposit box. But Dad read it to us. He said Mom wanted him to manage the estate and that the house was for the family. Rowan let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Riley, people hear what they want to hear, and greedy people read what they want you to hear. We need to see that will, the real one, not the bedtime story version your father told you. She pulled a notepad out of her purse and clicked a pen. I need you to tell me about the money, she said. Not the renovation money, the debt. Has your father taken out any loans recently? A second mortgage? A home equity line of credit? I shook my head. No. He's always complaining about being broke. That is why I pay for everything. He says the business is struggling. Rowan stopped writing and looked at me. If the business is struggling and he has no cash. But Vanessa is buying expensive groceries, and they are talking about trusts. Money is coming from somewhere. Riley, think. Have you seen any mail from banks? Any weird phone calls? I stared at my coffee cup, the black liquid rippling slightly from the vibration of the espresso machine. I tried to sift through the haze of the last few months. The tension in the house, the secrecy. Wait, I said. What? Rowan snapped. About 4 months ago, I said slowly, dragging the memory into the light. I got a text message. It was on a Tuesday. I remember because I was in a client meeting. It was from a bank. I think it was First National. It said something like, "Thank you for your inquiry regarding the home equity application for," and then it listed our address. Rowan's eyes locked onto mine. Go on. I thought it was weird because I do not bank with First National. I continued. I showed it to Vanessa when I got home. I asked her if Dad was taking out a loan. She laughed. She said it was a phishing scam. She said she and Dad had been getting them all week and told me to delete it and not click any links. And did you? Rowan asked. I deleted it. I said, it made sense. Scams happen all the time. Rowan leaned back in her chair, running a hand over her face. God, you are innocent. Riley, phishing scams send you a link to click so they can steal your password. They do not send you a confirmation of a specific address for a specific type of loan unless someone actually applied for it. My blood ran cold. You think they took out a loan? I think if your name is on that deed, they needed your social security number and your signature to apply for that loan, Rowan said, her voice low and urgent. If you did not apply for it, and they did, that is bank fraud. That is identity theft. That is a federal crime. But how? I whispered. How could they sign for me? Rowan looked at the binder again. You live in the same house. They have access to your mail. They probably have your social security number from old tax returns or medical records. And as for the signature? She gestured to the stack of receipts. You have signed plenty of birthday cards. Riley, it is not hard to trace a signature if you practice enough. I felt sick. The nausea rose up in my throat, bitter and acidic. My father? My own father. So what do? I asked, my voice trembling. Do I call the police? Do I confront them? No, Rowan hissed. Absolutely not. Do not say a word. Why? I asked. Because right now, we have suspicions. We do not have proof. If you confront them, they will destroy everything. They will shred documents, wipe hard drives, and claim you are crazy. Remember? You are the jealous, unstable stepdaughter. That is the narrative they are building. If you start screaming about fraud without evidence, you just prove their point. She ripped the page off her notepad and started writing a new list. Here is the plan, Rowan said, her voice clinical and precise. You are going to go back to that house. You are going to be the sad, defeated daughter. You are going to apologize for ruining the birthday dinner. You are going to tell them you are looking for apartments. I have to lie to them? I asked. You are not lying, Rowan said. You are buying time. While they think you are packing boxes, you are going to be gathering intelligence. I need pictures. Riley, I need you to find that will. I need you to find the deed. And most importantly, I need you to find that loan agreement. Where? I asked. Rowan looked at me like I was dense. Where does your father keep his secrets? In his office, I said. He has a filing cabinet and a desk drawer he keeps locked. Does he have a safe? Rowan asked. I think so, in the closet, but I do not know the combination. You do not need to crack the safe yet, Rowan said. Start with the office. Look for anything with a bank logo. Look for anything that says deed of trust or promissory note. And look for anything related to adoption or guardianship. Adoption? I asked, confused. Why? Because Vanessa made a specific point about real kids, Rowan said, tapping her pen against her chin. And she is talking about trusts. Trusts are often set up for biological children or legally adopted ones. If there is money moving around, I want to know exactly how she is classifying those two kids versus you. She tore the list off the pad and slid it across the table to me. Take photos of everything, she commanded. Do not take the physical papers unless you can do it without them noticing. If they realize a file is missing, they will panic. Just clear. High-resolution photos, front and back, get the fine print. I looked at the list. Mother's will, original. Property deed. Loan documents, First National. Trust documents, drafts. Any correspondence from the county clerk. It felt heavy in my hand. This wasn't a to-do list. It was a declaration of war. Rowan, I said, looking up at her, what if I find out? What if I find out they really did it? What if my dad stole my identity? Rowan's face softened, just for a fraction of a second. Then, if he did, he stopped being your father the moment he signed your name. He became a criminal, and we will treat him like one. She reached into her purse and pulled out a $20 bill, tossing it on the table. Coffee is on me, she said. Go home. Be invisible. And Riley? I looked at her, clutching the list. Check the trash. 2, she said. People get sloppy when they think they have won. I watched her walk out of the coffee shop, her heels clicking rhythmically on the tile floor. She looked like a soldier marching into battle. I felt like a spy who had just been dropped behind enemy lines with no weapon but a smartphone. I picked up the navy blue binder. It felt heavier now. Before, it was just receipts. Now, it was the prologue to a crime story. I walked out to my car, a sensible sedan that I had paid off 3 years ago. The drive back to the suburbs was a blur of highway signs and red taillights. My mind was racing, replaying every interaction I had with my father over the last 6 months, his evasiveness, his sudden inability to look me in the eye, Vanessa's smugness. Was it possible? Was it really possible that the man who taught me to tie my shoes, the man who cried when I graduated college, had sold me out for a kitchen renovation and a quiet life with his new wife? I turned onto my street. The neighborhood was quiet. It was a nice street. Mature oak trees lined the sidewalks, casting long, dappled shadows on the manicured lawns. I pulled into the driveway of 42 Oakwood Lane. I sat in the car for a moment, the engine idling. I looked at the house. It was a beautiful house. The new slate roof I had paid for glinted in the afternoon sun. The porch railing I had sanded and repainted myself last summer looked crisp and white. It used to look like home. It used to look like safety. But as I stared at the front door, remembering the key hidden under the mat, a key I wasn't supposed to need because I lived there, I felt a shift in my perception. The house didn't look like a home anymore. It looked like a vault. It looked like a massive, two-story safe that was holding something that belonged to me. And inside that vault were the people who were trying to keep me from the combination. I turned off the engine. The silence of the car was deafening. "Real kids," Vanessa had said. I gripped the steering wheel. "Who owns this?" I asked the dashboard. "Who actually owns this house?" I didn't know the answer yet, but as I opened the car door and stepped onto the driveway, I had paid to have resurfaced. I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going inside to sleep. I was going inside to hunt. The red numbers on my digital alarm clock changed from 1:14 to 1:15 in the morning. The silence in the house was heavy, a physical weight pressing down on the floorboards. I had been lying awake for hours, fully dressed in black yoga pants and a dark hoodie, listening to the rhythm of the house. I knew the sounds of this place better than anyone. I knew that the refrigerator in the kitchen kicked on with a low hum every 40 minutes. I knew that the third step on the staircase groaned if you stepped in the middle, but was silent if you hugged the wall. And I knew that my father's snoring, a rhythmic, congested rattle, usually started around midnight and didn't stop until dawn. I sat up, swinging my legs over the side of the bed. My bare feet touched the cool hardwood floor. I had decided against socks. On these polished floors, they could be slippery, and tonight I needed traction more than warmth. I opened my bedroom door, the hinge, which I had oiled myself 3 months ago, swung open silently. The hallway was a tunnel of shadows. At the far end, the door to the master bedroom was shut tight. I paused, holding my breath, straining my ears. Rattle, wheeze, rattle. Dad was asleep. And Vanessa? She was a light sleeper, or so she claimed, but she also drank 2 glasses of Chardonnay with dinner tonight to celebrate her victory over me. I was banking on the wine doing its job. I moved down the hallway. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat that felt loud enough to wake the neighbors. I had to force myself to breathe shallowly, to keep the sound of my own fear contained. I passed Haley and Jace's rooms. The doors were ajar. I could see the glow of a nightlight in Jace's room, casting long, monstrous shadows of his toys against the wall. I reached the top of the stairs and descended, hugging the wall, skipping the 3rd step. The living room was bathed in the ghostly blue light of the street lamp outside. The furniture, the sofa I had picked out, the coffee table where Vanessa had hidden the papers, looked like sleeping beasts. I turned left, toward the back of the house, toward the study. My father's office. Growing up, this room had been the man cave. It was where Dad went to pay bills, to watch the game on a small TV when Mom wanted to watch a movie, or to simply hide from the noise of a family. Since Vanessa moved in, it had become a forbidden zone. "Private," she would say. "Your father needs his space to manage the household affairs." Now I knew why. It wasn't a sanctuary. It was a bunker. I gripped the brass doorknob. It was cold. I turned it slowly, millimeter by millimeter, praying the latch wouldn't click. It gave way silently. I pushed the door open and slipped inside, closing it softly behind me. The room smelled of stale air, old paper, and a faint hint of lemon pledge. I didn't dare turn on the light. I pulled my phone from my pocket and turned on the flashlight app, keeping the beam pointed at the floor to avoid casting light on the windows. The circle of light swept across the Persian rug, up the legs of the heavy oak desk, and landed on the leather chair. I moved to the desk. It was a mess. Stacks of unopened mail, flyers for golf tournaments, and empty coffee cups littered the surface. It was chaos. But it was a surface-level chaos designed to make you look away. I pulled on the center drawer. Locked. I pulled on the side drawers. Locked. Panic flared in my chest. Of course they were locked. Rowan had asked me if he had a safe, but a locked desk was the first line of defense. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes, trying to channel the Riley of 20 years ago. Where did Dad put things when he didn't want to lose them? He wasn't a creative man. He was a creature of habit. When I was 10, he used to hide the key to the liquor cabinet in a hollowed-out book on the bottom shelf, but Vanessa had thrown out most of the old books. Think. He always emptied his pockets the moment he came into this room. Keys, change, wallet. I moved the flashlight beam to the bookshelf behind the desk. It was lined with framed photos, mostly of Haley and Jace. I noticed with a pang of bitterness and memorabilia. There, on the second shelf, sandwiched between a generic business trophy and a photo of Vanessa, was a chipped ceramic mug. It was a Colorado Rockies mug. I had bought it for him for Father's Day when I was 12. The handle was cracked, glued back together with epoxy that had yellowed over time. I reached up, my hand trembled. I tilted the mug. Clink! The sound was tiny, but in the silence of the room, it sounded like a gunshot. I froze, whipping my head toward the door. Silence, just the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. I reached into the mug and my fingers closed around cold metal. A small silver key. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I moved back to the desk, inserted the key into the lock of the main drawer, and turned it. The mechanism was stiff. I applied pressure, biting my lip. Click. I pulled the drawer open. It wasn't organized. It was a disaster. Papers were shoved in haphazardly. Some crumpled, some folded over. It looked like the filing system of a man who was drowning and trying to hide the water. I started sifting through the top layer. Takeout menus, an instruction manual for a lawnmower we didn't own anymore, a warranty for the dishwasher. Then I saw it. Buried beneath a stack of car insurance policies was a crisp, white envelope. It stood out because it wasn't crumpled. It looked fresh. And in the upper left corner, the Blue Eagle logo of First National Bank. My breath hitched. I pulled the envelope out. The window on the front displayed the recipient's name. Riley Prescott. The address was this house. I stared at my own name. I had never touched this envelope. I had never opened it. Yet here it was, hidden in my father's locked drawer. I opened the flap. My fingers felt numb, clumsy. I pulled out the document inside. It was thick, stapled in the corner. Home equity line of credit agreement. I scanned the page, the flashlight beam shaking violently in my hand. Borrower, Riley Prescott. Co-borrower, Mark Prescott. Property address, 42 Oakwood Lane. Principal amount, $48,500. $48,000. I felt the blood drain from my face, leaving me lightheaded. I had to grip the edge of the desk to keep from swaying. Nearly $50,000. I flipped to the last page, the signature page, and there it was. Riley Prescott. I stared at the signature. It wasn't just a scribble. It was my signature. The way the R looped at the top, the way the P disconnected from the rest of the name, the sharp T cross at the end. It was perfect. It was terrifyingly perfect. If I hadn't known for a fact that I was sitting in a client meeting in Lodo when this was dated, I would have sworn I signed it. A wave of nausea rolled over me. This wasn't just theft. This was a violation. My father had sat at this desk, practiced my name, perhaps tracing it from one of the many birthday cards I'd given him, and he had signed my financial death warrant. He had used the house I was paying to fix, the house my mother loved, as collateral for a loan I would never see a dime of. And the date. I checked the date next to the signature. It was signed 3 months ago, around the time Vanessa bought the new SUV, around the time they went on that weekend getaway to Napa. They were eating my credit. They were drinking my equity. I remembered Rowan's voice. Do not just get mad. Get evidence. I fumbled with my phone, switching from the flashlight to the camera. I laid the document flat on the desk. My hands were shaking so bad the first picture was blurry. Stop it, I whispered to myself. Pull it together. Riley. I took a deep breath. I focused. Snap. Page 1. Snap. The terms of the loan. Snap. The interest rate. 7%. Variable. God. They got a terrible rate. Snap. The signature page. I took 3 close-ups of the forged signature. I carefully folded the document and put it back in the envelope. I was about to shove it back under the car insurance papers when something else caught my eye. At the very back of the drawer, pushed all the way against the wood, was another envelope. This one was larger, manila. It looked older, the edges slightly frayed. I reached for it. It felt heavy, much heavier than the loan document. I pulled it into the light. There was no return address on the corner, just a stamped seal. Summit County Department of Human Services, Adoption Division. And across the front, in bold red ink, confidential. My heart stopped. You are just jealous of my real kids. Adoption files. This had to be Haley and Jace's paperwork. Vanessa had always been vague about the adoption process, claiming it was a private family matter from before she met my dad. But why was it in my father's locked drawer? And why was it so thick? I went to open the clasp. Creak. A floorboard settled directly above my head, in the master bedroom. I froze, killing the flashlight instantly. Darkness swallowed the room. I stood there, clutching the manila envelope to my chest, my eyes wide open, staring into the black. I heard a muffled cough from upstairs, then the sound of bed springs shifting, then silence. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. I couldn't open it. If I opened it, I would have to take everything out to photograph it. That would take minutes. If Mark came down for a glass of water, if Vanessa woke up. I couldn't risk it. Not yet. I had the loan. The loan was the smoking gun for the fraud. The loan was enough to get the restraining order Rowan talked about. But I needed to know what this was. I turned the flashlight back on, shielding the glow with my hand so only a sliver of light hit the desk. I placed the manila envelope down. I took a picture of the front cover, the seal, the confidential stamp. Then I noticed something written in pencil on the bottom corner of the envelope. It was faint, barely legible. I zoomed in with my camera. It was a date, August 12, 1992. I frowned. August 1992? Haley was 12, Jace was 10. They weren't even born in 1992. I was born in 1992. A cold chill, colder than the winter wind outside, swept through me. Why would an adoption file from 1992 be in with Haley and Jace's papers? Or was it their papers? I wanted to open it. Every cell in my body screamed at me to rip that metal clasp open and see the papers inside. But my survival instinct was screaming louder. Get out. You have the proof of the loan. Do not push your luck. I grabbed the First National envelope and shoved it back exactly where I found it, under the insurance papers. I placed the manila envelope at the back of the drawer, aligning it with the dust line so it looked untouched. I closed the drawer. It clicked shut. I locked it. I wiped the handle of the drawer with the sleeve of my hoodie, just in case my clammy hands had left a print. I walked back to the bookshelf. I placed the key back in the chipped Colorado Rockies mug. I made sure the handle of the mug was facing the exact same angle, 45 degrees to the left, as it was when I found it. I scanned the room one last time with the flashlight. Nothing out of place. The shadows were back where they belonged. I slipped out of the office, closing the door until the latch caught with the softest possible click. The walk back to my room felt like running through water. My legs were weak. My head was spinning. Safe inside my room, I locked the door. I leaned against it, sliding down until I hit the floor. I sat there in the dark, clutching my phone like a lifeline. $50,000, a forged signature, and a file from 1992. The betrayal was complete. They hadn't just been mean to me at a birthday party. They had actively, criminally dismantled my financial future to build their own. And that file. That date. I unlocked my phone. The screen was blindingly bright. I opened the message thread with Rowan. I selected the 4 clearest photos of the loan agreement, the one with the header, the one with the amount, the one with the property address, and the one with the signature that looked so much like mine, it made me want to vomit. I watched the blue progress bar as the images uploaded. Sent. Sent, sent, sent. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I needed to tell her. I needed to say it out loud to make it real. I typed, "Rowan, I went into the office. They did it." I paused, then added, "They used my name to mortgage the house." I hit send. I didn't mention the adoption file. Not yet. I couldn't even process that part. Right now, the $50,000 was the knife in my back. The file from 1992 was just a ghost I had glimpsed in the corner of my eye. But ghosts, I knew, had a nasty habit of haunting you until you acknowledged them. I looked at the time, 1:45. 30 minutes. My entire life had changed in 30 minutes. I crawled back into bed, but I didn't take off my hoodie. I felt cold, freezing. I pulled the duvet up to my chin, but the shivering wouldn't stop. Down the hall, the house was silent again, but it wasn't a peaceful silence anymore. It was the silence of a trap waiting to spring, and I was the only one who knew where the trigger was. The adrenaline that had fueled my excursion to the study was beginning to fade, replaced by a cold, profound numbness that settled deep in my bones. I sat on the floor of my bedroom, my back pressed against the door I had locked, the flashlight on my phone finally turned off. The room was illuminated only by the amber glow of the street lamp filtering through the blinds, casting striped shadows across the duvet I had kicked aside. My phone lay on the carpet next to me, the screen dark, hiding the evidence I had just sent to Rowan. The image of my forged signature on that $50,000 loan agreement was burned into my retinas, floating in the darkness every time I blinked. But Rowan had asked for more. She had asked for the will, the real one, she had said, not the bedtime story version. I turned my head and looked toward the closet. On the top shelf, buried behind a stack of old winter sweaters and a box of design school textbooks, was a gray metal lockbox. It was fireproof, heavy, and ugly. I had bought it the week after my mother's funeral, driven by a paranoid, frantic need to preserve whatever physical proof of her existence I could find. At the time, my father had told me I was being sentimental. "Let me keep the important papers in the safe downstairs." "Riley," he had said, his voice gentle, soothing, "you do not need to worry about that stuff." But I had insisted. It was one of the few times in my life I had told him no. I wanted her death certificate. I wanted the letters she had written to me when I was at summer camp, and I wanted the copy of the will she had given me when I turned 21, smiling and saying, "Just in case, baby girl, just so you know, you are taken care of." I stood up, my legs stiff. I walked to the closet and reached up, pulling the heavy box down. Dust motes danced in the sliver of light as I carried it to my desk. I sat down and switched on the small brass desk lamp, keeping the brightness low. The key was on my keychain, a small, jagged piece of brass I had carried with me every day for 7 years. I inserted it into the lock. It turned with a satisfying, heavy thunk. I opened the lid. The smell of old paper and lavender, my mother's signature scent, wafted out, hitting me with a wave of grief so acute it made my chest ache. On top were the letters, "To my darling Riley." I moved them aside gently, treating them like holy relics. Beneath them was the death certificate, a stark, clinical document that reduced my vibrant, laughing mother to a series of dates and causes. And at the bottom, in a blue legal folder, was the will. I took it out. The paper was thick, expensive bond paper. The cover sheet read, "Last Will and Testament of Elizabeth Ann Prescott." I remembered the day she died. I remembered the weeks that followed, a blur of casseroles and condolences. I remembered sitting in the living room while my father explained the will to me. "Mom left everything to me to manage," he had said, holding my hand, "the house, the savings, it is all for us. But I have to be the steward. You trust me, right, Riley?" I had nodded. I was 25, heartbroken, and he was my dad. Of course I trusted him. I hadn't even opened this folder in 7 years. I had just assumed that what he said matched what was written on these pages. I opened the folder. Article 1, Declaration. Article 2, Funeral Arrangements. I skipped past those, my finger tracing down the page, hunting for the words that would either save me or destroy me. Article 3. Disposition of real property. I leaned in closer, squinting against the dim light. I give, devise, and bequeath all my right, title, and interest in the real property commonly known as 42 Oakwood Lane, Denver, Colorado, to my daughter, Riley Elizabeth Prescott, in fee simple absolute. I stopped breathing. To my daughter, not to my husband, not to my family, to me. I read the next paragraph. However, I grant to my husband, Mark Anthony Prescott, a life estate in said property. He shall have the right to reside in the property for the remainder of his natural life. During the term of this life estate, Mark Anthony Prescott shall be responsible for ordinary maintenance and taxes. A life estate. Rowan had mentioned this possibility. It meant he could live here. It meant he couldn't be kicked out. But it didn't mean he owned it. I continued reading, my heart pounding against my ribs. The life tenant, Mark Anthony Prescott, shall not sell, mortgage, encumber, or otherwise use the property as collateral for any debt without the express written consent of the remainder interest holder, Riley Elizabeth Prescott. I read that sentence 3 times. Shall not mortgage, without express written consent. The loan document downstairs, the one signed 3 months ago for nearly $50,000, was not just a forgery, it was a legal impossibility. My father didn't have the right to mortgage the house. The bank shouldn't have even approved the application without my signature as the primary owner. That explained the forgery. He couldn't just apply as himself. He had to be me, or he had to pretend I was on board. I sat back in my chair, the room spinning slightly. All those times Vanessa had stood in the kitchen, sipping her wine, telling me I was a lodger. All those times she had threatened to kick me out. All those times she had talked about transferring the house to a trust for Haley and Jace. It was all a lie, a massive orchestrated bluff. Vanessa had no legal claim to this house, none. If my father died tomorrow, his life estate would extinguish, and the house would be 100% mine. Vanessa and her real kids would be the ones trespassing. But they acted with such confidence. Why? Because they banked on my ignorance. They banked on the fact that I was a grieving daughter who wanted to please her father. They banked on the fact that I wouldn't check the paperwork. And for 7 years, they had been right. I looked back at the document. There was more. Article 4, Residuary Estate and Trust. All the rest, residue, and remainder of my estate, both real and personal, of whatever kind and wherever situated, I give, devise, and bequeath to the Summit Trust Services, as trustee, to be held in trust under the name the Riley Prescott Support Trust. A trust. My mother had a life insurance policy. I knew that. She had a 401k from the pharmacy chain where she worked. I had assumed all of that went to pay for her medical bills, or went to my dad to help him survive. The primary beneficiary of this trust shall be my daughter, Riley Elizabeth Prescott. The trustee shall distribute income and principal as necessary for her health, education, maintenance, and support, and for the support of any children she may have. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, hot and fast. She had tried to protect me, even in death. She had tried to wrap her arms around me. She knew my father wasn't great with money. She knew he was weak, so she had locked it up. She had put the house in my name and the money in a trust. So where was the money? I had never received a statement from Summit Trust Services. I had never received a distribution. When I needed money for my divorce, I scraped it together myself. When I needed money to start my business, I took out a small business loan with a terrible interest rate. If this trust existed, why was I paying for the roof? Why was I paying for the water heater? I closed my eyes, and a memory surfaced. It was from about 4 years ago. I had come home and found Vanessa sorting through the mail. She had handed me a stack of magazines and bills, but I remembered seeing a thick envelope with a window on the counter. "What is that?" I had asked, pointing to it. "Oh, just junk mail for your dad," she had said, sweeping it into her purse. "Investment stuff. Boring." investment stuff. If the trust was managed by a third party, statements would be mailed to the beneficiary, to me, or to the house. Vanessa had been intercepting them. And if she was intercepting them, was she accessing them? I looked at the clause again. For the support of any issue, children, she may have. A horrible, twisting thought took root in my mind. Vanessa constantly talked about our children. She constantly referred to Haley and Jace as the future of the family. If she had somehow convinced the trustee, this Summit Trust Services, that she was my guardian, or that I was incapacitated, or, no, I was an adult, I was 32. But what if she was using the other clause? Any issue she may have. Haley and Jace weren't my children. They were my step-siblings. Unless... My mind flashed back to the adoption file downstairs, the one marked confidential, the one with the date August 1992. I shook my head, trying to clear the confusion. The pieces didn't fit yet, but the picture was starting to form, and it was ugly. I looked at the date on the will. It was signed 6 months before my mother died. My father was the executor. He knew. He knew every single word written on these pages. I imagined him sitting in the lawyer's office next to my mother, holding her hand while she was hooked up to chemo drugs, nodding solemnly as she explained that she wanted to make sure Riley was safe. He had promised her. And then he had gone home, married a woman who hated me, and spent 7 years gaslighting me into believing I was a burden in my own house. He wasn't just a coward. A coward runs away. My father had stayed and helped dismantle my life brick by brick. He had watched me pay for the kitchen in a house I already owned. He had watched me struggle to pay my business loan while he, or Vanessa, likely siphoned off the trust fund meant to support me. He had let Vanessa humiliate me at my own birthday dinner, knowing full well that she had zero legal standing to kick me out. You are just jealous of my real kids. The sentence took on a new, sinister meaning. It wasn't just an insult, it was a strategy. By painting me as the outsider, the jealous stepchild, they justified pushing me out. If I left, if I disappeared, if I stopped asking questions, it would be so much easier to keep pretending the house was theirs, to keep living off the equity they stole from me. I grabbed my phone. My hands were steady now. The shaking had stopped, replaced by a cold, hard precision. I opened the camera app. I photographed the cover page of the will. I photographed Article 3, focusing clearly on the words fee simple absolute and life estate. I photographed the restrictions on mortgaging the property. I photographed Article 4, the trust establishment. I opened the chat with Rowan. Riley, it is worse than we thought. I sent the photos. Riley, Mom left the house to me. Dad only has a life estate. He is not allowed to mortgage it. The loan is illegal even if the signature wasn't forged. I waited a beat, then typed again. Riley, and there is a trust. The Riley Prescott Support Trust. I have never seen a dime of it. Rowan, I think they have been stealing my mail. I put the phone down and looked at the will one last time. I ran my fingers over my mother's signature at the bottom. It was shaky. She had been so weak near the end, but it was hers. I am sorry, Mom, I whispered to the empty room. I am so sorry I was too stupid to look. But I wasn't stupid anymore. I carefully placed the will back in the blue folder. I put the folder back in the metal box. I locked it. I stood up and walked to the window, peering through the blinds at the dark street below. This house wasn't just a building. It wasn't just an asset. It was a fortress my mother had built for me. She had foreseen a future where I might be alone, where I might need a safety net, and she had woven it out of legal clauses and careful planning. And they had tried to cut it down. I looked at the driveway, where my father's leased SUV sat next to Vanessa's car. They were sleeping soundly, probably dreaming of the renovations they would do once I was gone, or the vacation they would take with the $50,000 they had stolen from my equity. They thought they were dealing with the Riley who cried at movies and baked cupcakes for the PTA. They thought they were dealing with the Riley who just wanted to be loved. They were wrong. They were dealing with the owner of 42 Oakwood Lane. And tomorrow, The landlord was going to start an eviction process of her own. But first, I had one more mystery to solve. The trust was missing. The loan was fraudulent. But that file downstairs, the one with the date that matched my birth year, was gnawing at the back of my mind. Why was it with Haley and Jace's papers? Why was it confidential? If my mother had set up a trust for me, why did Vanessa act like she controlled the purse strings for everyone? I needed to see that file. The loan was the weapon. But the file? I had a feeling the file was the motive. I turned off the desk lamp, plunging the room back into darkness. I didn't get back in bed. I sat in the chair, watching the shadows lengthen as the moon moved across the sky, waiting for the sun to rise, waiting for the house to wake up so I could begin the performance of my life. I would smile, I would apologize, I would pretend to pack. And then, when they lowered their guard, I would burn their house of cards to the ground. The morning sun hit the kitchen island with a brightness that felt offensive. I sat at the counter, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago, watching Vanessa bustle around the kitchen. She was humming. It was a tuneless, grating sound, the sound of a woman who believed she had won a war and was now just sweeping up the debris. "We are going to Le Jardin for lunch," Vanessa announced, wiping down the already spotless granite countertop. "Get dressed, Riley. It will be nice. A family outing to decompress after the excitement of last night." She didn't look at me. She didn't have to. Her tone made it clear that excitement was a euphemism for Riley ruining everything, and the lunch was a mandatory performance of forgiveness that I was expected to fund, or at least appreciate. My father sat at the small breakfast table, reading the sports section of the newspaper. He looked smaller today, hunched over his coffee, avoiding my gaze with a dedication that was almost impressive. Haley and Jace were in the living room, watching cartoons, their laughter floating in, a stark contrast to the tension in the kitchen. "I cannot," I said, keeping my voice flat. "I have a deadline. The architectural drafts for the Miller project are due tomorrow morning. If I do not finish them, I lose the contract." It was a lie. The Miller project had been finished 3 days ago, but I knew my father respected work because it brought in the money he so desperately needed. And Vanessa respected deadlines because it gave her a reason to exclude me without looking like the bad guy. Vanessa stopped wiping. She turned to me, a performative frown creasing her forehead. "Oh, that is a shame," she said, though her eyes glittered with relief. "We were hoping to discuss the transition, moving dates, logistics." "We can discuss it later," I said, standing up and rinsing my mug. "You guys go. Enjoy the crab cakes. I need to focus." "Well, if you insist," Mark muttered, finally looking up. He looked relieved too. He didn't want to sit across from me and pretend he hadn't forged my signature on a $50,000 loan. "We will bring you back a salad." 20 minutes later, the house was silent. I watched from the window as the SUV backed out of the driveway. Vanessa was driving. She always drove. As soon as the taillights disappeared around the corner, the clock started ticking. I didn't know how long lunch would take. Maybe 90 minutes. Maybe 2 hours if Vanessa decided to order dessert and lecture the waiter. I had to move fast. I turned from the window and walked straight to the study. The fear from last night was gone, replaced by a cold, vibrating intensity. I felt like a surgeon scrubbing in for an operation. I knew exactly where the infection was. I just needed to cut it out. I entered the office. The air still smelled stale. I went to the bookshelf, reached into the chipped Colorado Rockies mug, and retrieved the key. My movements were fluid, practiced. I unlocked the drawer. There it was, the manila envelope, the one marked confidential. I pulled it out and laid it on the desk. The sunlight from the window hit the red stamp, making it look like a warning label. Summit County Department of Human Services, Adoption Division. I took a deep breath and undid the metal clasp. It made a scratching sound that seemed to echo in the empty house. I reached inside and pulled out the stack of papers. It was thick, heavy. I placed the stack on the desk and picked up the first document. Decree of Adoption. Child, Haley Marie Miller. Adoptive parent, Vanessa Prescott. Date, October 14th, 2011. I stared at the paper. 2011. That was a year before Vanessa met my father. I picked up the second document. Decree of adoption. Child, Jace Anthony Miller. Adoptive parent, Vanessa Prescott. Date, June 3rd, 2013. I blinked, trying to process the words, adoptive parent. Vanessa's entire identity in this house, her entire weapon against me, was built on the concept of biology. Real kids. She had spat those words at me with such venom. You are just jealous of my real kids. She had preened about mother's intuition and blood ties whenever she wanted to make me feel like an outsider. But Haley and Jace were adopted. I felt a wave of confusion. There was nothing wrong with adoption. I respected it. But why lie? Why construct this elaborate, cruel fiction that she was their biological mother and I was the fake daughter? Why weaponize biology if she didn't have it either? I flipped the page. State of Colorado. Subsidy Agreement for Special Needs Adoption. The document outlined a monthly stipend provided to Vanessa for the care of Haley and Jace. It was a standard agreement, but then I saw the attached financial disclosure form. It was a breakdown of household income, used to qualify for the subsidies. Applicant, Vanessa Prescott. Spouse, Mark Prescott. Additional household contributors, Riley Prescott. Trust beneficiary, Ward. I stopped breathing. Ward? I was 32 years old. I was a business owner. I was not a ward. I flipped the page again, my hands shaking with a mixture of rage and discovery. Behind the adoption papers was a bank statement. It wasn't from a normal bank. It was a quarterly statement from Summit Trust Services. Account name, the Riley Prescott Support Trust. Beneficiary, Riley Prescott. Trustee, Summit Trust Services. Authorized representative guardian, Vanessa Prescott. I looked at the numbers. Balance, $420,000. Annual disbursement, $65,000. $65,000 a year. For 7 years. That was nearly $500,000. I scanned the transaction history. Every January, a check was cut for $65,000. The memo line read, household maintenance and care of beneficiary. And the signature on the receipt of funds? Vanessa Prescott. My knees gave out. I sank into my father's leather chair, the papers crinkling in my grip. It all made sense. The twisted, sickening logic finally clicked into place. Vanessa wasn't just a mean stepmother. She was a parasite. When she married my father, she must have found out about the trust. She must have found a way to position herself as my caretaker to the trustee, probably claiming I was incompetent or that, as a young woman living at home, the money was needed to maintain the family residence for my benefit. But here was the kicker. She used my trust fund as proof of income to qualify for the adoption subsidies for Haley and Jace. And she used Haley and Jace's presence to justify the need for a larger house and household maintenance costs from my trust. It was a circle of fraud. She used me to fund them, and she used them to displace me. And the insults? The real kids' comments? That was the psychological cage. By making me feel worthless. By making me feel like a burden who was lucky to be allowed to stay. She ensured I never asked questions. She ensured I never looked at the finances. She needed me in the house to claim the care funds, but she needed me submissive so I wouldn't realize I was the one paying for everything. I was paying for my own abuse. I grabbed my phone and started photographing. Snap, the adoption decrees. Snap, the subsidy agreement listing me as a ward. Snap, the trust statement showing the $500,000 balance I didn't know I had. Snap, Vanessa's signature claiming the funds. My hand was trembling so hard I had to brace it against the desk. $65,000 a year, plus the $50,000 they just stole with the mortgage, plus the salary I poured into renovations. They had taken everything. I reached for the last document in the stack. It was the file I had seen the corner of last night, the one dated August 12th, 1992, my birth year. The file was thinner than the others. The cover sheet was stamped "Cancelled," sealed. Petition for adoption. Child. Baby girl Doe, D.O.B., August 12, 1992. Prospective adoptive parents. Mark Anthony Prescott and Elizabeth Ann Prescott. I frowned. Prospective? I opened the file. Inside was a letter from a law firm in Chicago. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Prescott, per the instructions of Mr. Arthur C. Sterling, the biological father, the contested adoption proceedings are hereby halted. Mr. Sterling has agreed to relinquish full custody to Ms. Elizabeth Ann Prescott, on the condition that the child retains the name Prescott for safety, but that a distinct financial trust be established for the child's future, funded solely by Mr. Sterling. The trust shall be known as the Riley Prescott Support Trust. I read the letter twice, then a third time. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. Mark was not my father. I wasn't adopted by them. I was reclaimed. It appeared my mother had an affair, or a relationship, with this Arthur Sterling. She had gotten pregnant. Maybe she and Mark were separated? Maybe they weren't together yet. The dates were fuzzy, but the legal reality was clear. Mark had tried to adopt me to make it official, to hide the illegitimacy, but Arthur Sterling, my biological father, had stepped in. He gave me up to my mom, but he paid for me. He set up the trust. That explained why the trust was so huge. That explained why Mark had no access to it and why Vanessa had to wiggle her way in as a guardian. It wasn't Mark's money. It never was. And Mark? All these years, I thought his distance was grief. I thought his weakness was just personality. But it was resentment. I was the living proof of another man's wealth. I was the cuckoo in the nest. He had raised me, yes, but he had clearly never forgiven my mother, or me, for the fact that the security of this house, the money that kept them afloat, came from my biological father. Vanessa must have known. She must have found out, and she used it. You are just jealous of my real kids. She wasn't just lying about Haley and Jace. She was taunting me with the one truth I didn't know, in her twisted mind. Haley and Jace were her real kids because she chose them. She adopted them. But me? I was just a bank account with a pulse. I was the fake daughter of her husband, a leftover from a scandal she was now exploiting for profit. I looked at the pile of papers. The adoption decrees for the real kids, the stolen trust fund from my real father, the canceled adoption file that proved Mark was just a bystander in my biological history. I stood up. I felt light, weightless. For years, I had carried the heavy cloak of gratitude. I thought I owed Mark everything for raising me after Mom died. I thought I owed Vanessa for stepping in. I thought I had to buy my place at the table. But the table was mine. The house was mine. The money was mine. And Mark? He wasn't a victim of a domineering new wife. He was an accomplice. He had allowed his wife to plunder the fortune of the child he promised to raise, likely because he felt entitled to it as compensation for raising another man's daughter. I looked at the clock. They had been gone for an hour. They would be ordering their entrees now. Vanessa was probably making a toast to family unity, while spending money that Arthur C. Sterling had intended for my education, for my safety, for my children. I carefully arranged the documents on the desk. I took one final photo, a wide shot, all the lies spread out on the mahogany surface. Then, I began to put them back. I slid the trust statements back under the adoption decrees. I put the canceled 1992 file at the bottom. I slid the stack back into the manila envelope. I clasped it shut. I put the envelope back in the drawer. I locked it. I wiped the handle. I put the key back in the mug, turning the handle to the exact 45-degree angle. I stood in the center of the room. If they had just been honest, if Mark had told me about Arthur Sterling, if Vanessa had asked for help instead of stealing, I would have given it to them. I loved them. I would have shared. But they didn't want a partner. They wanted a victim. They wanted a ward. I walked out of the study, closing the door with a soft click. I went to the kitchen and poured the cold coffee down the sink. The question that had haunted me since last night, who is real, finally had an answer. Haley and Jace were innocent pawns, bought and paid for with stolen money to complete Vanessa's image. Mark was a fraud, playing the role of a father to hide his greed. Vanessa was a criminal mastermind masquerading as a suburban mom. And me? I was the daughter of Arthur Sterling. I was the owner of this house, and I was the only thing in this zip code that wasn't a lie. I heard the sound of a car engine in the driveway. They were back early. I leaned against the kitchen counter, my heart rate slowing to a dangerous, icy calm. Let them come in. Let them bring their leftovers and their fake smiles. Let Vanessa brag about her real kids. I smiled, and for the first time in 7 years, it reached my eyes. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a wolf that had just realized the sheep were trapped in the pen with her. The front door opened. "Riley!" Vanessa called out, her voice shrill and commanding. "Come help with the bags. We bought you some dessert." "Coming. Vanessa," I called back. I walked toward the hallway to greet them. I was ready. The investigation was over. The trial was about to begin. The conference room at Ellis & Associates was designed to intimidate. It was all glass walls, chrome accents, and a view of the Denver skyline that cost more per square foot than my father had earned in the last decade. I sat at the head of the long mahogany table, the contents of my investigation spread out like a gruesome autopsy of my family life. Rowan stood by the whiteboard, a marker in her hand, looking less like my college roommate and more like a general strategizing a nuclear strike. "Let us review the timeline," Rowan said, her voice cutting through the air-conditioned silence. She uncapped the marker. "Because what you have brought me isn't just a property dispute. Riley, it is a RICO case wrapped in a suburban cardigan." She wrote 1992 on the board. "You are born," she said. "Biological father is Arthur Sterling, wealthy, absent, but guilty enough to pay up. He funds the Riley Prescott Support Trust. Your mother, Elizabeth, is the trustee, guardian." She drew a line to 2011. "Your mother passes away. Mark Prescott, who, let us be clear, has zero biological claim to you and, according to the canceled adoption file, zero legal claim to you other than being your stepfather, takes over the household. He marries Vanessa within a year." She drew a line to 2012 to 2013. Vanessa enters the picture. She finds out about the trust. She realizes that the house is legally yours and the money is legally yours, but you are 20-something, grieving, and trusting. So she positions herself as your guardian to the trustee. Rowan turned to me, her eyes sharp. "This is the part that makes me sick. Riley, she used the existence of your trust fund, the money meant for your survival, to prove household financial stability to the Summit County Adoption Agency. She could not have adopted Haley and Jace on Mark's income alone. She used your money to buy her real family." I stared at the papers on the table. The subsidy agreement with my name listed as a ward stared back at me. "So," I said, my voice steady but cold, "I paid for my own replacements." "Exactly," Rowan said. "She used your trust to qualify for the adoptions. Then, once she had Haley and Jace, she used their special needs status to claim subsidies, and simultaneously, she kept withdrawing $65,000 a year from your trust for household maintenance because, ostensibly, she was taking care of you and the property." "Double dipping," I murmured. "Triple dipping," Rowan corrected. "She gets the trust money, she gets the state adoption subsidies, and she lives rent-free in a house you own." She circled the year 2024. "Which brings us to today. Why the sudden hostility? Why the get out in 30 days demand? Why the rush to mortgage the house with a forged signature?" I shook my head. "Because they are greedy? Because they hate me?" "No," Rowan said. "Greedy people do not kill the golden goose unless the goose is about to fly the coop. I called a contact of mine this morning, an estate planner who used to work with the firm that handled your mother's will." She leaned forward, planting her hands on the table. "Riley, look at the trust documents again. What is the date of full vesting?" I picked up the statement I had stolen from the study. I scanned the fine print on the back, past the legalese I had ignored before. Trust assets shall remain under the management of the trustee until the beneficiary reaches the age of 32, at which time the trustee shall transfer full control of the principal and remaining assets to the beneficiary, barring any finding of incapacitation. 32, I whispered. You turned 32 yesterday, Rowan said. Happy birthday, Riley. You just became the CEO of your own life. The moment that clock ticked over, the trustee is legally required to contact you directly to hand over the keys. No more guardian Vanessa, no more intercepted mail. I felt the blood drain from my face. That is why she wants me out. She needs you gone, Rowan confirmed. She needs you to sign a waiver, or move out and lose touch, or, and this is the dark part, she needs to prove you are mentally unstable so she can petition to extend her guardianship. That is why she is gaslighting you. That is why she is calling you jealous and obsessive in front of witnesses. If she can paint you as unhinged, she keeps the money. And the mortgage? I asked, pointing to the photo of the loan agreement. A desperate cash grab, Rowan said grimly. They know the gravy train is ending. They know once you take control of the trust, you will see the withdrawals. They are looting the ship before it sinks. They forged your name to pull $50,000 of equity out of the house while they still had physical access to the deed. I sat back, the leather chair creaking. It was so calculated. It was so industrial. There was no love, no hate, just cold, hard accounting. Okay, I said. The numbness was gone, replaced by a sharp, crystalline focus. So we have them. We have fraud. We have theft. We have forgery. We have enough to send them to prison for 10 years, Rowan said without hesitation. But we need to be smart. If we just call the police right now, they will claim it was a misunderstanding. They will claim you authorized it verbally. They will claim the adoption papers were filed incorrectly. We need to nail the coffin shut. She sat down opposite me and opened her laptop. Here is the strategy, she said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Phase 1. Stop the bleeding. I am filing an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order on the assets today. It will freeze the house title. They will not be able to sell, transfer, or mortgage it. I am also sending a formal fraud alert to First National Bank regarding that loan. That freezes the $50,000. They will know, I said. If the bank freezes the money, Mark will know immediately. Let him panic, Rowan said. Panic makes people sloppy, but we are not telling them why it is frozen. Let them think it is a bank error. Let them sweat. Phase 2, Rowan continued. The adoption board. I am drafting a letter to Summit County Human Services. We are attaching the proof that Vanessa used a trust she did not own to qualify for custody, and that she has been misappropriating funds meant for you to support her lifestyle. I held up a hand. Wait. Rowan stopped typing. What? Haley and Jace, I said. If we report this to the adoption agency, what happens to them? Rowan sighed, her face softening slightly. Riley, these children are living in a house funded by fraud. Their mother is a grifter. The state will likely open an investigation. They could be placed in foster care temporarily. No, I said firmly. No foster care. I was in the system. Rowan, even if it was just for a few months before my mom got me back, I know what that shadow feels like. Haley is 12. Jace is 10. They are innocent. They think Vanessa is their mom. They think Mark is their dad. If we just blow this up, we destroy their world. Their world is already a lie, Riley, Rowan argued gently. I know, I said, but I want to control the explosion. I do not want them dragged out by police in the middle of the night. I looked at the photo of the 2 kids I had taken last Christmas. They were smiling, holding the Nintendo Switch I had bought them, probably with my own stolen money. We need a safeguard, I said. I want a social worker there, but not just any social worker. Someone who can step in immediately if things go south. Someone who can ensure they stay with a relative, or maybe even stay in the house with me if Mark and Vanessa are arrested. Rowan looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You are a better person than I am. Riley, okay, I can make a call. I know a crisis intervention specialist with the county. She can be there. But we need a pretext. We cannot just bring a social worker to dinner. We do not need a pretext for dinner, I said, a plan forming in my mind, a plan that used Vanessa's own arrogance against her. We need a family meeting. Rowan raised an eyebrow. A family meeting? Vanessa wants me out, I said. She wants me to sign papers, right? She wants me to agree to leave so she can secure the future of the real kids. So, I will give her what she wants. I will tell her I am ready to sign. I leaned forward. I will tell her I want to have a formal family sit-down. I will tell her I have prepared a separation agreement to make my moving out official. I will invite her sister, my Aunt Linda, and Uncle Mike. Vanessa loves an audience. She loves performing the role of the benevolent matriarch. She will think it is her victory lap. Rowan smiled. It was a terrifying, shark-like smile. And instead of a surrender, it is an ambush. Exactly, I said. I bring you, you bring the social worker. We lay everything out on the table, the will, the trust, the adoption files, the loan. We do it in front of the witnesses she brought to shame me. The aunt and uncle, Rowan noted. Are they in on it? No, I said. Linda and Mike are decent people. They just believe whatever Vanessa tells them because she cries on cue. If they see the documents, if they see the theft, they will turn on her, and they will be the ones to comfort Haley and Jace when the police come. Rowan tapped her pen on the table. It is high risk. If Vanessa realizes what is happening before we lock the doors, she could destroy the physical originals. She will not realize, I said confidently, because she thinks I am stupid. She thinks I am just the jealous stepdaughter who is finally admitting defeat. Her ego is her blind spot. Rowan closed her laptop with a snap. Okay, we do it. When? Saturday, I said. 2 days from now. That gives us time to get the TRO and the fraud affidavit ready. And the social worker? Rowan asked. Get her, I said. Tell her the safety of 2 special needs children is at risk. Tell her we are preventing a trauma, not causing one. Rowan stood up and extended her hand. I took it. Her grip was firm, grounding. You know, Rowan said, her voice dropping to a serious, almost reverent tone. Most people would just take the money and run. Riley, most people would not care about the kids who replaced them. They did not replace me, I said, picking up the adoption file that proved my biological father had fought for me, had paid for me, had wanted me to be safe. They were just the next victims in line. I gathered the papers, my evidence, my history, my weapon, and put them back into the binder. One more thing, I said, pausing at the door. The money Arthur Sterling left, the $400,000. Yes? When I get it back, I said, I want to set up a trust for Haley and Jace, a real one Vanessa cannot touch. Rowan grinned. I will draft the paperwork. Now get out of here. You have a performance to prepare for. I walked out of the office and into the elevator. As the doors closed, I caught my reflection in the polished steel. I didn't look like the tired, weeping girl from the birthday party anymore. I looked like Elizabeth Ann Prescott's daughter. I looked like Arthur Sterling's investment. They used me as a name on a piece of paper, I said to the empty elevator. They thought I was just a signature. The elevator dinged. Opening to the lobby, I stepped out, my heels clicking against the marble floor with a sound that echoed like a gavel striking a block. Now, I whispered, it is time for me to use my name to end the game. Saturday arrived with the terrifying precision of a pendulum swing. Vanessa had spent the entire morning orchestrating the stage for what she called a family future summit, but which I knew was actually my public execution. The house smelled of pine cleaner and slow-roasted lamb, a scent combination that would forever remind me of betrayal. By 6 o'clock, the guests had arrived. Aunt Linda and Uncle Mike were my father's sister and brother-in-law. They were good people, the kind of relatives who sent $20 bills and birthday cards and believed everything they read on Facebook. They were also, unfortunately, the perfect audience for Vanessa's theater of martyrdom. Riley, honey, you look tired, Aunt Linda said, hugging me in the hallway. Vanessa told us how hard you have been working. It must be exhausting trying to keep up with those deadlines. It is a lot, I said, returning the hug. But tonight should clear everything up. We moved to the dining room. Vanessa had outdone herself. The table was set with the good linens, the ones I had bought from a boutique in France 3 years ago, and a centerpiece of white lilies that looked suspiciously like a funeral arrangement. Mark sat at the head of the table, wearing a stiff button-down shirt that seemed to be choking him. Haley and Jace were seated on one side, looking scrubbed and uncomfortable in their Sunday best. Vanessa placed herself opposite Mark, the queen on her throne, leaving me the seat next to Uncle Mike, effectively positioning me as a guest at my own table. "Thank you all for coming," Vanessa began, tapping her wine glass with a spoon. The crystal rang out, a sharp, piercing note. Mark and I wanted to have this little dinner to celebrate, well, a new chapter. She smiled at me. It was a smile that showed too many teeth. "As you know, Riley turned 32 this week," Vanessa continued, her voice dripping with maternal concern. "And we realized that we have been holding her back by letting her stay here, in the family home. We have kept her from truly launching into her own life. It is hard for a bird to fly if the nest is too comfortable, right?" Uncle Mike nodded sagely, taking a bite of a bread roll. "That is true. Kids stay home too long these days. My neighbor's son is 35 and still plays video games in the basement." "Exactly," Vanessa said, seizing on the comparison. "And while we have loved having Riley here, supporting her through her struggles, it is time to focus on the future. Specifically, the future of the children." She gestured grandly to Haley and Jace. Haley looked down at her plate, pushing peas around with her fork. She knew I wasn't struggling. She knew I had bought her that dress. "This house," Vanessa said, sweeping her hand around the room, encompassing the walls I had painted and the floors I had refinished, "is the legacy Mark and I have built, and it is only right that it goes to the children who need it, my real kids." The phrase landed in the center of the table like a dead bird. "Your real kids?" Aunt Linda asked, slightly confused. "Well, of course, Haley and Jace are family, but Riley is Mark's daughter too." Vanessa laughed, a light, tinkling sound that made my skin crawl. "Oh, Linda, you know what I mean. Riley is from before. She is from a different time in Mark's life, a closed chapter. But Haley and Jace? They are our present. They are the ones who share our blood, our daily life. They are the ones who truly belong to the foundation of this home." I watched my father. He was staring intensely at his roasted lamb, sawing at it with unnecessary force. "Right, Mark?" Vanessa prompted, her voice sharpening just a fraction. Mark looked up, his eyes darting briefly to me before sliding away. "Right," he mumbled. It is about securing the future for the little ones." I took a sip of water, hiding the smirk that threatened to break my mask of polite submission. They were digging their own graves with every word, and Aunt Linda and Uncle Mike were witnessing the shovel work. "So," Vanessa said, reaching under the table and pulling out a pristine leather folder. "To make things official, and to make sure there are no hard feelings, Mark and I had a lawyer draw up a little something, just a standard separation agreement." She slid the folder across the tablecloth toward me. It stopped just inches from my plate. "What is this?" I asked, keeping my voice innocent. "Just a formality," Vanessa said breezily. "It states that you acknowledge that you have received ample financial support from us over the years, room, board, care, and that you are voluntarily moving out in 30 days. It also confirms that you have no claim on the property or the household assets, so we can transfer the title into a trust for Haley and Jace without any legal hiccups." I opened the folder. The document was 1 page. It was laughably simple. It was essentially a waiver of all rights. "It says here I acknowledge that I have made no financial contribution to the property," I read aloud, looking up at Vanessa. "Is that right?" "Well, obviously," Vanessa scoffed. "Buying a few groceries here and there does not count as a contribution. Riley, we have carried the mortgage. We have paid for the repairs. We have kept a roof over your head while you played with your design projects." I saw Haley's head snap up. She looked at me, eyes wide. She remembered the summer the roof was replaced. She remembered me handing the check to the contractor because Dad was at the bank. "So, the roof?" I asked, feigning confusion. "The $12,000 for the roof? You guys paid that?" "Mark paid that," Vanessa lied smoothly, not missing a beat. "He works hard for this family." "And the kitchen renovation?" I asked. "The $45,000 for this beautiful quartz and these cabinets? That was you?" Vanessa sighed, a sound of infinite patience. "Riley, do not be petty. We managed the budget. Just because you picked out the colors does not mean you paid the bills. Mark and I have poured our life savings into this house for the sake of the real children. Please, do not embarrass yourself in front of Linda and Mike by pretending you are some kind of benefactor." Uncle Mike looked uncomfortable. "Hey, now, let us not argue about money at dinner. Riley, if your dad says he paid for it, he paid for it. Just sign the paper and make peace." I looked at the pen Vanessa was holding out to me. It was a Gold Cross pen. It was actually my pen. I had lost it 2 months ago. "I just want to be clear," I said, my voice trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer effort of holding back the truth for 30 more seconds. "If I sign this, I am admitting that this house is 100% yours and Dad's, and that I have no rights to it, and that I am leaving willingly?" "Yes," Vanessa said, thrusting the pen closer. "It is time to grow up. Riley, sign it, for the family." I reached out. My fingers brushed the cool metal of the pen. Ding dong? The doorbell chimed, echoing through the tense silence of the dining room. Vanessa froze, her eyes snapped to the hallway. "Who on earth is that?" "Did you order something?" Mark asked, looking relieved for the interruption. "No," Vanessa snapped. She looked at me, annoyance flashing across her face. "Riley, go get that. It is probably Amazon delivering one of your packages. God knows you shop enough." "Sure," I said. I didn't take the pen. I stood up, smoothing my napkin on the table. "I will be right back," I said. I walked to the front door. The hallway felt miles long. Behind me, I heard Vanessa whispering to Aunt Linda. "She is just stalling. She is so dramatic." I reached the door and unlocked it. I took a deep breath, inhaling the cool evening air that leaked through the jamb. I pulled the door open. Rowan Ellis stood on the porch, looking like the angel of death in a tailored black suit. Behind her stood a stern-looking man in a gray overcoat, the inspector from the adoption board, and a woman with a kind, weary face holding a clipboard, the crisis intervention specialist. "Good evening, Ms. Prescott," Rowan said, her voice loud enough to carry down the hall. "We are here for the meeting." "Please," I said, stepping aside and gesturing widely. "Come in. Everyone is in the dining room." I led them down the hallway. I heard the scraping of chairs as Vanessa and Mark stood up, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. When we entered the dining room, the scene was almost comical. Vanessa was mid-sip of wine. Mark was holding a bread roll. Aunt Linda and Uncle Mike were staring with their mouths slightly open. "Riley?" Vanessa asked, her voice wavering. "Who are these people? I did not invite anyone else." "I did," I said. I walked back to my seat but didn't sit down. I stood at the head of the table, next to where Rowan had positioned herself. Rowan placed her briefcase on the sideboard, right next to the roast lamb. The click of the latches was louder than the doorbell had been. "Mrs. Prescott, Mr. Prescott," Rowan said, her tone professional and icy. "My name is Rowan Ellis. I am Riley Prescott's attorney." "Attorney?" Mark choked on his bread. "Riley, what the hell is this?" "And these," Rowan continued, ignoring him, "are Inspector Davis from the Summit County Department of Human Services and Ms. Albright, a court-appointed social worker." Vanessa's face went paper white, the wineglass in her hand tilted dangerously. "Social worker? Why is there a social worker in my house? Get out. This is a private dinner." "Actually, Vanessa," I said, my voice calm, cutting through her rising hysteria, It is not your house. Excuse me? Vanessa hissed. I just told you. You told a lot of stories, I interrupted. But we are done with stories. We are doing facts now. Rowan opened her briefcase and pulled out a stack of files. She didn't hand them to Vanessa. She handed them to Uncle Mike. Sir, Rowan said, you seem like a reasonable man. Would you mind looking at the deed to this property? Uncle Mike, bewildered, took the paper. He put on his reading glasses. Sure. It says, owner, Riley Elizabeth Prescott, life estate, Mark Prescott. What? Aunt Linda gasped. But Vanessa said... And the next document, please, Rowan instructed. The mortgage agreement signed 3 months ago with First National Bank. Uncle Mike flipped the page. Borrower, Riley Prescott, amount, $48,500. He looked up at me, confused. Riley, you borrowed 50 grand? No, Mike, I said, looking straight at my father. I was in a client meeting when that was signed, but Dad was here. Weren't you, Dad? Mark dropped the bread roll. It rolled off the table and hit the floor. He looked like he was going to be sick. That is a lie, Vanessa shrieked. She stood up, knocking her chair over. She is lying. She forged it to frame us. She is jealous. She is mentally unstable. Sit down, Mrs. Prescott, Inspector Davis said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of government authority. We are not here about the mortgage. That is for the police. We are here about the adoption subsidies. Vanessa froze. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Adoption subsidies? Aunt Linda whispered. But Vanessa said Haley and Jace were her biological children. She said they were her real kids. I looked at Haley. She was staring at Vanessa, tears welling in her eyes. She knew. Of course she knew she was adopted. But hearing her mother lie about it to the world, erasing her history to score points against a stepdaughter, that was a different kind of pain. Inspector, Rowan prompted. We have evidence, Inspector Davis said, consulting his tablet, that you, Vanessa Prescott, utilized the Riley Prescott Support Trust, a trust you have no legal claim to, as proof of household income to qualify for the adoption of these 2 children. Furthermore, you have been collecting state subsidies for their care while simultaneously draining the trust fund of $65,000 a year for household maintenance that was actually paid for by the beneficiary, Ms. Riley. That is complicated financial planning, Vanessa stammered, desperate now. You do not understand. I am the guardian. I am protecting the family assets. You are not the guardian, I said. I turned 32 yesterday. The trust is mine. The house is mine. And the real kids you keep talking about? They are the ones you used as pawns to steal money from a man you never even met. I reached into the pile Rowan had laid out and pulled out the canceled adoption file from 1992. Linda, Mike, I said, turning to my aunt and uncle. You always wondered why Dad was so distant with me, right? Why he let Vanessa treat me like a servant in my own home? I tossed the file onto the table. It slid across the linen and stopped right in front of Mark. Because he isn't my father, I said. Not really. My biological father was Arthur Sterling. He is the one who set up the trust. He is the one who bought this house for Mom. Mark just married into the money, and for 30 years, he has been resenting me for it. Mark covered his face with his hands. A low sob escaped him. Vanessa looked around the room. She looked at Aunt Linda, whose face had hardened into disgust. She looked at Uncle Mike, who was reading the fraud documents with shaking hands. She looked at Haley and Jace, who were shrinking away from her. She realized the stage had collapsed. You ungrateful little witch, Vanessa spat, her voice dropping the sweet facade entirely. I raised you. I cooked for you. I tolerated you. You stole from me, I corrected. You stole my inheritance. You stole my credit. And worst of all, you stole the truth from these kids. I nodded to Ms. Albright, the social worker. She moved quietly to the side of the table where Haley and Jace were sitting. Hi, guys, she said softly. My name is Sarah. I know there is a lot of yelling right now. Why don't we go into the living room? I have a game on my phone we can play while the adults talk. Haley looked at me. Go with her, Hales, I said gently. It is okay, I promise. Haley grabbed Jace's hand. They stood up and walked away from Vanessa without looking back. Vanessa made a move to grab them. No, you cannot take my children. Sit down, Inspector Davis barked, or I will call the officers waiting in the car right now. Vanessa collapsed back into her chair. She looked small. She looked old. The lighting in the dining room, which she had arranged so carefully to flatter herself, now seemed to cast harsh shadows on her panicked face. So, I said, picking up the separation agreement Vanessa had tried to make me sign. About this agreement. I ripped it in half. The sound of the tearing paper was the only sound in the room. I think we need a new agreement, I said. One where you explain to the police where my $400,000 went. I looked at my father. He was weeping silently into his hands. And you, I said to him, you don't have to worry about the life estate, Dad. He looked up, a flicker of hope in his wet eyes. Riley. Because according to the will, I said, my voice devoid of mercy, the life estate is void if you attempt to mortgage the property without my consent. You broke the contract. Dad, you are evicted too. The silence that followed was heavy, final. The dinner party was over. The food was cold. And the real family Vanessa had tried to build on a foundation of lies had just crumbled into dust. I turned to Rowan. I think we are done here. Rowan nodded. She pulled out her phone. I will call the officers in. As the sirens began to wail in the distance, getting louder with every second, I sat down in the chair at the head of the table, my father's chair. I picked up the glass of wine Vanessa had poured for herself, looked her dead in the eye, and took a sip. It tasted like victory. Rowan stood at the head of the table, the black fabric of her suit absorbing the dim ambient light of the dining room. She looked like a judge who had already written the verdict. She reached out with a manicured hand and picked up the leather folder Vanessa had slid across the table moments ago, the so-called separation agreement. The room was so quiet, I could hear the ice melting in Aunt Linda's water glass. Rowan flipped the folder open. She scanned the single page inside, her eyes moving left to right with mechanical precision. It took her perhaps 10 seconds. Then, she looked up, her gaze landing directly on Uncle Mike. Mr. Prescott, Rowan said, her voice dangerously soft. You run a hardware store, correct? You understand contracts? I do, Mike said, his voice tight. He was looking at Mark, who was staring at his lap. Well, Rowan continued, holding the paper up for the room to see. This document is not a separation agreement. It is a voluntary termination of property rights. It is a quitclaim deed disguised as a family memo. If Riley signed this, she would be transferring her entire legal interest in this property, an interest worth upwards of $700,000, to Mark and Vanessa Prescott for the consideration of $0.00. Aunt Linda gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Mark, is that true? It is standard, Vanessa interjected quickly, her voice pitching up. It is just to simplify the estate planning. Riley does not need this house. She has her own career. It also, Rowan cut in, her voice sharpening like a blade, makes no mention of the existing last will and testament of Elizabeth Prescott. It attempts to override a probate court order with a dinner table signature. In the legal world, we call this an attempt to defraud. She dropped the folder back onto the table. It hit the wood with a slap that made Vanessa flinch. That is a lie, Vanessa hissed, her eyes darting around the room, looking for an ally. That lawyer does not know what she is talking about. She is just Riley's college friend trying to scare us. I am not here as a friend, Mrs. Prescott, Rowan said coldly. I am here as the attorney of record, and I am not the one you should be scared of. Rowan stepped back, ceding the floor to me. I stood up. My legs felt solid, rooted to the floorboards I had paid to refinish. I reached into the bag Rowan had brought and pulled out the first piece of evidence, the First National Bank envelope. "Since we are talking about legal documents," I said, my voice steady, projecting to the back of the room where Haley and Jace had just exited. "Let us talk about this one." I pulled out the loan agreement. "This is a home equity line of credit agreement," I stated, holding it up. "Dated 3 months ago, borrower, Riley Prescott, co-borrower, Mark Prescott, loan amount, $48,500. I looked at my father. He was sweating profusely, the drops beating on his forehead under the dining room chandelier. "Dad," I said, "can you tell Aunt Linda and Uncle Mike when I signed this?" Mark opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish gasping for air. "I will answer for you," I said. I did not. On the date this document was signed, I was in a site meeting with the Miller client in Lodo from 9 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon. I have the calendar invites and the witness testimony to prove it. I turned the document around so the signature page faced the table. "But look at that signature," I said, pointing to the loop of the R. "It looks just like mine, does it not? Almost perfect. Someone must have practiced a lot. Maybe they traced it from the birthday cards I gave them every year." "That is ridiculous," Vanessa cried out, her laugh shrill and forced. "Banks make mistakes all the time. It is probably a clerical error. They mixed up the files. We never took out a loan in your name. Mark, tell them." Mark looked up, his eyes pleading. It was just a bridge loan. Riley, for the business. We were going to pay it back before you ever knew. It was just temporary. We needed the cash flow." "So you admit it?" I asked, locking eyes with him. "You admit you forged my signature to mortgage the house?" "I am your father," Mark snapped, a flash of his old defensive anger surfacing. "I raised you. I needed help. It is family money." "It is fraud," Uncle Mike said. His voice was low, shocked. He looked at his brother with an expression I had never seen before, pure disappointment. "Mark, you forged her signature? That is a felony." "He did not mean to," Vanessa shouted. "We were desperate. Riley has all this money and she refuses to share. She is selfish." "Selfish?" I repeated the word, letting it hang in the air. I reached into the bag again. "Let us talk about who actually owns this house," I said. "Because Vanessa keeps telling everyone that I am a lodger, that I am a guest." I pulled out the blue folder, the original will of Elizabeth Prescott. "This is my mother's will," I announced. "Probated 7 years ago. Vanessa, have you ever read it?" Vanessa crossed her arms, looking away. "I do not care about old papers." "You should," I said, "because Article 3 is very specific." I opened the document and read aloud, articulating every syllable. "I devised the property at 42 Oakwood Lane to my daughter, Riley Elizabeth Prescott, in fee simple absolute." I looked up. "That means I own it, 100%, not 50-50, not as a tenant." I looked at my father. "And here's the part you forgot, Dad. I grant my husband, Mark Prescott, a life estate. He may reside in the property for his lifetime, provided he acts as a responsible steward." I paused for effect. "And provided," I continued, raising my voice slightly, "that he does not sell, mortgage, or encumber the property without the written consent of the owner." I slammed the will down on top of the forged loan agreement. "You broke the will, Dad," I said. "You mortgaged the house without my consent. You forged my name to do it, legally. Your life estate is now void. You are trespassing." The room went deathly silent. Aunt Linda was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. She looked at Vanessa, the woman she had welcomed into the family, the woman she had defended, with horror. "You told us the house was yours," Aunt Linda whispered to Vanessa. "You told us Riley was mooching off you." "She is," Vanessa shrieked. "She is a burden. She does not contribute anything." "Is that so?" I asked. I turned to Inspector Davis. "Inspector, would you like to explain the contribution part?" The inspector stepped forward. He placed a heavy manila file on the table. The sound was like a gavel strike. "Mrs. Prescott," the inspector said, his voice flat and official. "This is the file from the Summit County Department of Human Services. Specifically, the subsidy agreement you signed for the adoption of Haley and Jace." Vanessa went pale. The fight seemed to drain out of her, replaced by a primal fear. "We have conducted a preliminary audit," the inspector continued. "To qualify for the adoption of 2 special needs children, you were required to show proof of financial stability. You submitted a trust fund statement." He pulled out the paper. "The Riley Prescott Support Trust," the inspector read. "Beneficiary, Riley Prescott. Balance, $420,000. "400,000?" Mark whispered. He looked at Vanessa. "Ness? What is he talking about?" My father didn't know. The realization hit me with a sick thud. Vanessa had played him too. "She did not tell you, Dad?" I asked, a dark amusement bubbling up in my chest. "Vanessa found out about the trust my biological father left me. The one Mom kept secret from you because she knew you would be jealous. Vanessa found it, and she got herself listed as the guardian." You stole my daughter's money?" Mark stammered, looking at his wife. "I used it for the family," Vanessa screamed, standing up again. "I used it to keep this house running. I used it to buy groceries. I used it to pay for your stupid business debts. Mark!" "Inspector," Rowan cut in, "how much was withdrawn?" $65,000 annually for 7 years, the inspector replied. "Signed for by Vanessa Prescott as legal guardian." "And the subsidies?" Rowan asked. "Mrs. Prescott also collected $2,000 a month in state subsidies for the children," the inspector said, claiming that the household income was insufficient without it. "So," I said, connecting the dots for everyone in the room, "you used my money to prove you were rich enough to adopt them. Then you used them to prove you were poor enough to get subsidies, and you kept the difference." I picked up the adoption file for Haley and Jace. "You stood there tonight," I said, my voice trembling with rage, "and you told everyone that they were your real kids. You shamed me for being the stepchild. You made me feel less than—" I threw the file on the table. It slid into Vanessa's wine glass, tipping it over. Red wine spilled across the white tablecloth like a blood stain. "They are adopted, Vanessa," I said, "just like I was supposed to be. You do not have any real kids. You just have victims." "I love them," Vanessa wailed. "I am their mother. Biology does not matter." "If biology does not matter," I shouted back, losing my cool for the first time, "then why did you spend 7 years torturing me with it? Why did you tell me I was jealous of your bloodline? Why did you lie to them?" "Because I had to," Vanessa yelled, her face twisted and ugly. "I had to make sure they were secure. I had to make sure we had the money. It was all for them. I did what a mother has to do." "You did what a thief does," I said. "They would have rotted in foster care if it was not for me." Vanessa pointed a shaking finger at me. "You should be thanking me. I gave them a home. I gave you a home." "You gave us a crime scene," I said. I looked at Aunt Linda and Uncle Mike. They were standing up now, backing away from the table as if Vanessa was contagious. "Mike," Mark said, reaching out a hand. "Mike, please, I did not know about the trust. I swear." "But you knew about the mortgage." "Mark," Uncle Mike said, his voice thick with disgust. "You forged your daughter's name. You looked me in the eye and told me you were doing well. You are a liar." "And you?" Aunt Linda said to Vanessa. "I defended you. I told everyone Riley was being difficult. I am so sorry, Riley." "It is okay, Aunt Linda," I said softly. "You did not know." I turned back to Vanessa. She was breathing heavily, her chest heaving. She looked trapped. She looked at the spilled wine, at the piles of incriminating paper, at the inspector writing notes in his book. "You ruined everything," she whispered, looking at me with pure hatred. "We were happy. We were a family." "We were a lie," I said, "and I am done paying for it." I leaned over the table, placing my hands flat on the mahogany surface, looking directly into her frantic eyes. "You asked me earlier if I was jealous," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. You told the whole room I was jealous of your real kids. I gestured to the mess of files, the proof of her theft, her deception, her hollow claims of maternity. Do you still think I am jealous, Vanessa? I asked slowly. Do you really think I am jealous of a family built on stolen money and forged signatures? Do you think I am jealous of children you bought with my inheritance just to use as props in your little suburban play? Vanessa didn't answer. She couldn't. I am not jealous, I said, straightening up. I am the landlord, and your lease is up. I turned to Rowan. Show them the door, I said. As I turned my back on them, walking toward the window to breathe, I heard the inspector speak. Mrs. Prescott, Mr. Prescott, he said, I'm afraid I need to ask you to accompany the officers. We have some questions about banking fraud and welfare theft. I didn't look back. I looked out at the front yard, where the flashing blue lights of the police cruiser were just starting to reflect off the oak trees. The party was over. The cleanup was just beginning. The dining room was a tableau of destruction. Red wine dripped from the edge of the white tablecloth onto the carpet I had paid to have steam cleaned just last month. Vanessa was slumped in her chair, her chest heaving, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal looking for a ventilation shaft to crawl through. Mark sat with his head in his hands, a broken man who had finally run out of lies. But Rowan was not done. She reached into her briefcase one last time. The movement was slow, deliberate, almost theatrical. She pulled out a single, thin file. It wasn't crisp and new like the mortgage fraud documents. It was yellowed with age, the edges soft and frayed. There is one final piece to this puzzle, Rowan said, her voice cutting through the heavy silence. We have established that Vanessa stole the trust money. We have established that Mark forged the mortgage, but the question remains, why? She placed the file in the center of the table. The stamp on the cover was faded but legible. Cancelled. This, Rowan said, pointing to the file, is a petition for adoption filed in August of 1992. Mark's head snapped up. His face went from pale to a sickly shade of gray. Rowan, please, he rasped. Do not. It is too late for please, Mark, I said, my voice cold. Let them see it. Inspector Davis stepped forward, picking up the narrative where Rowan left off. This file documents an attempt by Mark Prescott to adopt a female infant born in 1992. That infant was you, Riley. Aunt Linda frowned, leaning in. But Mark is her father. Why would he need to adopt his own daughter? Because he is not her father, the inspector said. The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. At least, not biologically, and legally. His claim was challenged. He opened the file, revealing the letter I had read in the study, the letter from the lawyers in Chicago. The biological father was a man named Arthur Sterling, the inspector explained, summarizing the legalese for the room. He was a wealthy industrialist. When Riley's mother fell ill during the pregnancy, there was a dispute. Mark tried to step in and adopt the child to secure legal paternity, but Mr. Sterling blocked it. Vanessa looked up, her eyes narrowing. She was processing this new information, looking for an angle, a weapon she could use. So she is a bastard, Vanessa spat, grasping at straws. I knew it. I knew she did not belong here. Mr. Sterling agreed to relinquish custody to Riley's mother. The inspector continued, ignoring Vanessa's venom. But he attached a condition. He established an irrevocable trust fund, the Riley Prescott Support Trust. It was funded entirely by his estate. It was designed to ensure that his daughter would never be dependent on anyone else for her survival. Rowan looked at Mark. That is why you resent her, isn't it? Mark, you raised another man's daughter in a house paid for by another man's money, and when Elizabeth died, you felt entitled to some compensation. Mark didn't deny it. He just looked down at the spilled wine, his silence a confession. And you, Rowan said, turning to Vanessa, you found out. You saw a gold mine. You saw a trust fund with a $500,000 balance and a stepfather who felt cheated by life. So you conspired to drain it. The twist, I said, stepping forward. is that you spent 7 years treating me like the poor relation. You treated me like the unwanted stepchild who should be grateful for a roof over her head. But the truth is, I am the only solvent person in this room. I am the only one who actually owns anything. The house, mine. The trust, mine. The renovations, paid for by me. I looked at Vanessa. You are the one who is destitute. Vanessa, you have nothing, no house, no income, and as of today, no access to my money. Vanessa stood up, her chair scraping violently against the floor. She began to scramble, grabbing at the papers on the table, the adoption files, the trust statements, the forged mortgage. No, she screamed, her voice cracking. You cannot do this. People will not believe you. They will not believe a bitter adopted brat over a real mother. I am a mother. I raised these children. She clutched the papers to her chest, as if physically holding them could change the reality written on them. Give me those papers, Vanessa, I said calmly. It does not matter what the papers say, she yelled, backing away toward the china cabinet. I am the one who was here. I am the one who cooked the meals. I am the one who made this a family. You are just a checkbook. That is all you ever were. A way to access the money so we could live like normal people. The room went silent again. Vanessa froze, realizing what she had just screamed. A way to access the money, Uncle Mike repeated, his voice shaking with anger. Is that what you just said? Riley was just a tool for you? Vanessa looked at Mike, then at Linda. She saw the revulsion in their faces. She had dropped the mask. There was no loving stepmother left. There was only the grifter who had been caught. Vanessa stammered. I meant, she helped the family. Rowan, I said, not taking my eyes off Vanessa. Tell her what happens next. Rowan stepped forward, her voice ringing with authority. Vanessa Prescott, these documents are being transferred immediately into the custody of the Denver Police Department, First National Bank, and the Summit County Department of Human Services. We are looking at multiple counts of wire fraud, forgery, identity theft, grand larceny, and welfare fraud. Each count carries a sentence of 5 to 10 years. And Mark, Rowan added, looking at my father, you are looking at conspiracy to commit fraud and bank fraud for the mortgage application. The penalties are severe. Mark let out a sob. I am sorry, he whispered. Riley, I am so sorry. Sorry does not pay back $400,000. Dad, I said softly. At the other end of the room, Haley let out a small, frightened whimper. I turned immediately. The anger in my chest evaporated, replaced by a fierce, protective instinct. I walked over to where Ms. Albright, the social worker, was sitting with Haley and Jace on the small sofa near the window. Haley's eyes were wide and terrified. Jace was clutching his sister's arm, his knuckles white. I knelt down in front of them, ignoring the chaos behind me. Hey, I said, keeping my voice low and steady. Look at me. Hales, look at me. Haley looked at me, tears spilling down her cheeks. Are they going to jail? She whispered. They have to answer for some bad things they did, I said honestly. I wasn't going to lie to them. They had been lied to enough. But listen to me. None of this is your fault. Do you hear me? Not a single bit of this is on you. But Mom said, Jace started, his voice trembling. Mom said we cost too much money. My heart broke. Vanessa lied, I said firmly. You are not expensive. You are priceless. And you are not just subsidies. You are my brother and sister. Maybe not by blood, and maybe not by the same dad, but you are my family. And I am going to make sure you are safe. Ms. Albright placed a gentle hand on Haley's shoulder. My job is to make sure you two are okay, she said kindly. We are not going to let anyone hurt you, and Riley is going to be right here involved in everything we do. I took Haley's hand and Jace's hand in mine. They were cold. I squeezed them. I am not going anywhere, I promised. I am the owner of this house, remember? And I say you are welcome here. Just then, the doorbell rang. It wasn't the polite chime of a guest. It was followed immediately by a heavy, authoritative knock. Vanessa jumped as if she had been shot. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." Rowan went to the door. I stayed kneeling with the kids, shielding them with my body as much as I could. Rowan opened the door. 2 uniformed officers stood there, their radios crackling with static. The blue lights from their cruiser pulsed through the open doorway, illuminating the hallway in harsh, rhythmic flashes. "We received a call from Inspector Davis," one of the officers said, stepping inside. "He is in the dining room," Rowan said, gesturing. The officers walked into the dining room. The space felt suddenly very small. "Vanessa Prescott?" the officer asked. Vanessa was pressed against the china cabinet, still clutching the crumpled papers. She looked wild, her hair coming loose from its perfect bun. "You cannot take me," she said, her voice high and thin. "I have children. I have a reputation." "Ma'am, we need you to come down to the station to answer some questions regarding a fraud investigation," the officer said, reaching for his handcuffs. "Please put the papers down." Vanessa dropped the papers. They fluttered to the floor like dead leaves. "Mark Prescott?" the second officer asked. Mark stood up slowly. He looked like a ghost. He looked at me, but I didn't look back. I was looking at Haley, making sure she was focusing on my face, not on her parents being handcuffed. "Ms. Albright," I said softly, "maybe take them to the kitchen for some ice cream? There is a carton of chocolate in the freezer." "Good idea," Ms. Albright said. She ushered Haley and Jace toward the kitchen, blocking their view of the dining room with her body. I stood up as the officers led Vanessa and Mark toward the front door. Aunt Linda and Uncle Mike stood in the corner, holding each other, silent and horrified. As they reached the threshold, Vanessa stopped. She planted her feet, resisting the officer's grip for a second. She turned her head and looked at me. Her eyes were black holes of malice. "You will regret this," she hissed. "You will regret destroying this family. You will be all alone in this big house. Riley, you think winning feels good? Wait until the silence hits." I walked toward her. I didn't stop until I was 2 feet away. I looked at the woman who had stolen 7 years of my life, 7 years of my money, and 7 years of my confidence. "This family was destroyed the day you decided to turn us all into line items on a ledger," I said. "You turned me into a bank account. You turned Haley and Jace into subsidies. You turned Mark into an accomplice." I leaned in closer. "I did not break the family, Vanessa," I said. "I just turned on the lights, and if the house is empty, that is fine. I am an interior designer. I know how to renovate." The officer tugged on her arm. "Let's go, ma'am." She tried to say something else, but the words caught in her throat. She looked at the house one last time, the house she had tried so hard to steal, and then she was led out into the night. Mark followed. He didn't say anything. He didn't look back. The shame was a heavy coat he would be wearing for a long time. Rowan stood by the door. She watched them go, then gently closed the heavy oak door. Click. The sound was final. The lock engaged. The storm was outside. The house was quiet. I turned around. Aunt Linda was weeping softly into Uncle Mike's shoulder. Rowan was gathering the papers from the floor, organizing them back into evidence files. From the kitchen, I heard the faint sound of a spoon scraping against a bowl. I walked past the dining room table, past the spilled wine, past the ruined dinner. I walked to the kitchen doorway. Haley and Jace were sitting at the island. Ms. Albright had found the chocolate ice cream and was scooping it into bowls. Haley looked up. Her eyes were red, but she wasn't crying anymore. "Are they gone?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "They are gone." "Are we staying?" Jace asked, a smudge of chocolate on his cheek. I walked over and sat on the stool next to him. I put my arm around his shoulders. He leaned into me, heavy and warm. "For tonight, yes," I said. "Ms. Sarah is going to stay with us, and tomorrow we will figure out the next step, but I promise you this. Nobody is going to trick you again. Nobody is going to use you to get paid." I looked at Haley. In this house, I said, my voice thick with emotion, you are real people. You are not assets. You are not a paycheck. You are my brother and my sister. And that is the only title that matters. Haley managed a small, wobbly smile. Okay, she whispered. Okay, I repeated. I left them to their ice cream and walked back to the front of the house. I opened the front door again and stepped out onto the porch. The police cruiser was gone. The street was quiet. The oak trees rustled in the night breeze. I looked at the house, my mother's house, Arthur Sterling's gift. For the first time in 7 years, I didn't feel like a guest. I didn't feel like a lodger. I felt the weight of the key in my pocket, and I knew that no one else had a copy. The legal battle would be long. The court dates would be exhausting. The emotional scars on Haley and Jace would take years to heal, but the lie was dead. I took a deep breath of the cool night air. It smelled of rain and ozone. It smelled like a clean slate. I was Riley Prescott. I was the daughter of Arthur Sterling and Elizabeth Prescott, and I was finally, truly home. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please comment below and let me know where you are listening from. I would love to hear your thoughts on Riley's Revenge. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button so this story can reach even more people.